Hey guys, welcome to the channel. As you see in the thumbnail, what if Goku can use 100% of Ultra Instinct in Tournament is power? Before I start, please do support for more awesome content, and subscribe my channel and like this video. Go support and follow the Shadowwriter01 for writing that awesome fanfic, and also make sure to comment on this story. Link in the description. The Multiverse, that included the infamous Universe 7 where the lives of Son Goku and the people around him took place, consisted of 12 universes that had been created net to each other, surrounded by the neutral zone and the void, all of them created by the king of all Lord Zeno, who resided over all of it from his personal realm, a small unpopulated pocket of space that was holding his palace. Beyond all of that, however, I stood another, even greater kind of multiverse. This consisted of different timelines that split off from each other at different points in time. Alternate realities. Each of them a multiverse of its own, with their own versions of the 12 universes, each of them with a mortal realm and an afterlife, and alternate versions of the beings that I stood there, both mortals and gods. Some of these alternate worlds had been created by cosmic imbalances and freak incidents, the most, however, by time travel. Every time the entire reality was split into two at the point where the history as it was meant to be was changed. Over time, however, more and more of these timelines were formed, maybe too many. Universe 7, the realm of Lord Zeno, ca 22 years after the Cell Games, and circa 5 years after the Great Battle of the Multiverse. Timeline 0, built on top of something that looked like a giant jellyfish that was floating freely in the space of Zeno's realm, was Lord Zeno's palace. And inside the palace, in one large room, was standing a large device with an even larger screen, looking somewhat like simply an oversized hypermodern TV set. In front of this device was a group of people who were sitting in a line of seats in the darkened room, looking at the screen. Under these people were the two incarnations of Lord Zeno themselves and their highest adjutant, the Grand Priest. This all looked pretty much like a cinema, but it was much more. The scenes they were seeing here were nothing else than a recording from another timeline. Like the Grand Priest had explained, this was a device that could monitor different timelines and show events that were or had been happening there on its screen, nearly like a movie. The device was also able to either show the current present of the reality in question or the past and even the future of that timeline. Alternate timeline recording. The screen showed a scene of a group of Super Saions fighting a single other Super Saiyan, but not a normal one, but one with a green-haired muscular berserk form, who in the timeline it showed was being called the legendary Super Saiyan Broly. The ones who were currently fighting him were Son Goku, Gohan, and future Trunks. The fight took place on some desolated planet filled with nothing but ruins, somewhere in the South Galley by what had been said. A planet that was a short time away from being hit by an asteroid. So not only did they had to fight an incredible strong opponent, they also needed to get away from there in time before the impact. Krillin, Mutant Rashi, Ulong and Vegeta were also there, but they had stayed out of the fight so far. The first three because they had absolutely no chance and they knew they would only get in the way. Vegeta was because, I can barely believe that this monster is me in that timeline, one of the people sitting in the second row of seats watching this recording said. He was also Broly, but this one was looking slightly different from the one they were watching on the screen. His skin color was a bit darker, his shoulders and figure when he was in his normal form were a bit broader. That differences were probably because they had lived completely different lives. They had just watched his counterpart blowing up a planet, in front of some of its native people who had been forcefully deported from it, by nobody else than Broly's and his father's counterparts, and that after a decade-long reign of terror in that Broly's counterpart had devastated the greatest part of the South Galley. To say they were horrified at what their friend could have been under different circumstances would be an understatement. Most of all Broly himself. Don't worry about that. That guy is not you. You are completely different than him. A person sitting in the row before him, right beside one of the Zeniths, said. It was Son Goku. But like Broly, it was not the same one they were watching on the screen, but the Goku of their timeline. The person sitting in the first line of seats, net to the two Zeniths and the High Priest themselves, were nobody else than Son Goku, Gohan, Vegeta, Android 17 and 18, Lord Beerus, the god of destruction of Universe 7, the Angel Whis, and Broly himself. Sitting in the second row behind them were Jiren, Toppo, Dispo, Kozrel, and a few other Pride troopers from Universe 11, together with their god of destruction Belmod, the Angel Makwarita, and Kaioshin Kai, basically their entire team from the Tournament of Power several years before. In the third row were Beerus' brother Kampa, the Angel Vados and their Kaioshin Fuwa, together with Hit and the three Scions Kaba, cauliflower and kale from Universe 6, as well as the Kaishin Gawasu, the angel Kus and god of destruction Rumshur from Universe 10, and finally in the fourth row the goddess Helles, Kaishin Pel, the angel Sour and their old team from Universe 2. They were all here as Lord Zeno's guests. In fact, Goku, Vegeta, Gohan, 17, 18, Broly and Jiren had been here for the last 5 years. Since the so-called Great Battle of the Multiverse. They all had become powerful enough to match even the angels. And with that so powerful that them even living in the mortal realm for longer time could destabilize the universe. Quite ironically, they had grown too strong for the mortal world, so they were only allowed to return for one day all 1 or 2 years. Until their families joined them in the afterlife and they would not longer need to return at all. The two Lord Zenos had also given them all the title of his personal advisors. That basically meant that the Zenos asked them about their opinion about something whenever he felt like it. Aside from them, nobody was quite sure why the Zenos had chosen equally this group here out of all the gods and mortals and the multiverse to watch this recording. And like the Zenos had stated, this one was only the first of many they had to watch. Yes, alternate versions of people can be very different, Gohan assured Broly as well, practically like different people. Indeed, this other Broly is unsettling. It is startling how the same person can be a hero in one timeline and a villain in another, Topo said, right Jiren? His old comrade Jiren was just sitting silently, and nodded lightly. Oh really? A hero in one world, a villain in another. Are you talking about anyone we know here? 18 asked him sarcastically. Who knows 18? 17 remarked equally sarcastically. They all knew the story of future Trunks and their own counterparts who had devastated the Earth and killed a great part of humanity. Years before Goku Black aka Zamasu finished what they had started, along with practically all life in their universe. For you mortals that might be the case, Beerus commented, but gods like me seem to be generally the same in every timeline. Well, I admit that is probably because we have been along since before most of these timelines split off. I agree with you here, Beerus, the goddess Helles from Universe 2 stated. I am myself and equally beautiful in every timeline, for better or worse, Kampa remarked. Oh shut up, Helles replied. And that is coming from you of all people. I could never be a completely loveless fiend like this guy, but you could probably. Hey! Kampa called out. The three Kaishins Shin, Fuwa and Pel were just watching soberly as their gods of destruction were arguing. So were the three angels, who were simply smiling. Not everyone, however, was so tolerant to their antics. Could you stop quarreling with each other? Ruamshi, the god of destruction from Universe 10, who resembled a pink elephant, said, Indeed, you are gods of destruction, the high priest stated, please act like it. That caused them to shut up, for the moment at least. Vegeta was meanwhile just sitting beside them with a frown on his face. He and the others had watched so far as his own counterpart had panicked at seeing Broly's power, and had been sitting completely uselessly at the side, while the others were fighting. And on top of that, his counterpart was constantly talking about how they had no chance, and it was senseless to fight because apparently Broly was the legendary Super Saiyan. It was truly a disgrace. Was there any chance that he would have acted in the same way? If some incredible powerful opponent would have shown his full power right away like that, would he have cracked in the same way like his counterpart had if they did? Never, he thought. He would be afraid, terrified even, but he would never let it overcome him like this. He himself might have acted like an idiot too often, but he had never cowered and let others fight in his place. Hopefully his counterpart would be able to recover his pride before this would be over. They watched how the fight continued. At least this guy is not nearly as strong as me, Broly pointed out. Neither are our other selves, Goku replied. This seemed to have happened a long time ago, probably around the same time we were fighting Cell. I think so too, Gohan stated. I mean, future Trunks is there with them, and he looks nearly equally like before the Cell games. And I am still a child, but I am already a Super Saiyan. So it should be around that time. But I seem weaker than I had been when we had left the time chamber. This is quite weird. I am not sure when and how this timeline changed from ours. And this Broly there had a device that actively suppressed his power for over 10 years or so, Vegeta said. You just had a shock color around your neck. You are right, Broly replied. This other Paragus seemed much worse than his own father. They had obviously never been stranded on Vampa, and this Paragus was now running his own private army. He had destroyed planets, enslaved people, and put his Broly under some kind of permanent mind control. All in the name of building up his own empire and taking revenge on Vegeta. Or would have his own father done the same things if they had not been trapped on Vampa for all these years? This Paragus had used his troops, Broly and the slaves they had captured to build up something he called Planet New Vegeta. In truth, only a lifeless planet that was about to be hit by an comet, which he had the slaves build a fake palace on and plant a forest of trees around. All that to make it look like a habitable world, if you don't go too far away from the palace. He had given Vegeta the false promise to make him king to lure him into the trap, and the rest of the Z fighters along with him. In truth, he had been planning to take over Earth after he had got them out of the way. But none of this mattered anymore, because Broly had overcome Paragus' controlled device and was now an uncontrollable killing machine that destroyed everything in his path. This timeline is actually quite different from yours, the High Priest told them. You remember how I told you how an ancient civilization in Universe 7 had created the first time machine? And how this was the reason the gods had forbidden time travel? Your timeline and any other you have encountered so far are split off from the timeline where these aliens had created this time machine and used it to send someone back into their past. The timeline you see here, however, is split from the one that had been changed by the time traveling of these civilizations. So the differences actually go back thousands, in a few cases millions, of years. But since this changes didn't really affect the science or Earth itself, you were still be born and your lives turned out quite similar. Recording. Hey Kakarot, do you care about your son? They had heard Broly saying a short time earlier, shortly after the beginning of the fight. Before he met Goku, future Trunks and Gohan in the brutal clash as Super Saiyans, and managed to overpower and beat down all three of them. Now he fired a blast at the young Gohan, who was hanging beaten and half-conscious on the wall of one of the many ruins. Bastard, Caulifla said. I hope they will manage to beat him, Kale said. Just watch the recording, Kale, the High Priest told her. We give no spoilers, Zeno said. No spoilers, future Zeno agreed. This guy needs to be stopped, Topos said as well. Yes, he is a monster, Brienne from Universe 2 agreed. Menaces like him are equally the reason the Pride Troopers iced in Universe 11, Topos stated. Is that the reason you have refused the position as the new god of destruction of Universe 11? Beerus asked him. What happened during the Tournament of Power had taught me a few things about myself. If I had to give up my belief in justice, then I didn't want to be a destroyer. If you say so, Beerus replied flatly. The fight on the screen kept going on. In this moment Piccolo appeared, stopped the blast aimed at Gohan, and joined them. He also gave him, Goku and future Trunks Senzu beans, so that they could fight once again. The screen showed them how Piccolo had arrived with a spaceship from Earth, identical to the one Goku had taken for his trip to Namek back then. Nearly right afterwards they saw a scene that was particularly embarrassing for Vegeta, as Piccolo was practically literally dragging his counterpart towards the battlefield. Before deciding it was pointless, calling him a coward, leaving him there and joining the fight himself. I admit I am glad that Piccolo is not here in person right now, Vegeta murmured as he watched the scene. By the way, Zenchans, Goku asked the two Lord Zenus by the nickname he had for them. Why did you want to show us this recording of the other timelines anyway? It is for the new tournament, they both said. Everyone looked at him. Lord Zeno, you want to hold a tournament between timelines? Yes. On the screen meanwhile they just saw Broly taking a Kamehameha from Goku and coming out without a scratch, and then continued to overpower and beat down their counterparts once again. World of the Void 1 day earlier. It was somewhere in the void between the universes. Here a large fighting stage had been created. That a bit ironically was looking somewhat like a giant spin-top floating in the emptiness. It was the same fighting area that had originally been built for the Tournament of Power years ago, and that had been restored by Lord Zeno recently. Two fighters were right now fighting an intense duel, while the two Lord Zenos, the High Priest, Vegeta, Son Gohan, Android 17 and 18, Broly and Jiren, and also their other guests from Universe 11, 6 and 2 were watching. Ties 2 who were fighting were Beerus, the god of destruction of Universe 7, and Son Goku. They were already fighting for a while. Goku was in the form of a god-ki-powered Super Saiyan 4. In this form he possessed a reddish fur that covered most of his upper body, long black hair that was shimmering greenly because of the god ki flowing through him, and red and yellow rings formed around the irises of his eyes. This form was basically a combination of a regular Super Saiyan 4 and an ascended Super Saiyan Blue. Beerus fired a large blast of destruction energy. It was more than powerful enough to eradicate nearly every other being and would be a serious threat even to another god of destruction, but Goku just stopped it with a move of one hand and redirected it out into the void. They charged at each other in a speed that most members of the audience could not even see, and exchanged punches. Beerus had clad himself completely in destruction energy, but Goku could not only withstand it, he was using it himself on his fists. In fact, Beerus was fighting an uphill battle, one that he would have thought impossible a few years ago. He had been at the ropes right from the beginning. But despite, or rather equally because of that, he was in glee. For so long he had been left without any challenge, with nobody in Universe 7 even be able to come close to him, except Whis, of course. Beerus had hoped for the prophecy that the Super Saiyan God would finally provide him with a real opponent. He would have never expected both Goku and Vegeta to actually surpass him. Not to mention a few of the other fighters from their group. Beerus could not deny that it irritated him on more than one level that not only one, but at least SI mortals from his own universe were now either rivaling or downright stronger than him. But thanks to them he had not only finally been challenged, he had actually been forced to improve. Beerus had actually grown stronger during this last SI years, more than he had in the 2,000 or 3,000 before. This was what he had wished for, wasn't it? He had gotten all he had hoped for and more. Beerus tried another attack, but Goku moved faster than him, charged up an attack and fired. Kamehameha, Goku called out and fired it at Beerus, who stopped it with a massive shield of more destruction energy that he formed in front of himself, that literally ate the Kamehameha up and erased it from instance. Goku, however, reacted. He used instant transmission to appear right net to Beerus and send a hard punch into his face, that sent him flying down and crashing right into the stage that was made from what was known as the hardest material in the 12 universes, and forming a giant crater where he hit the ground. It looked as if the impact had nearly broken the entire fighting platform in two. Goku was slowly descending and powering down into his base form. He grinned. Inside the crater, however, Beerus was just standing up again. And he grinned back at Goku. "A good fight," Beerus called out to him. "You win this time." "Yes, a good fight, Lord Beerus," Goku agreed. Then suddenly it happened. First they heard a loud cracking sound. Then the ground under Beerus' feet was suddenly breaking away. They had truly broken the fighting stage in two. To their luck, however, in opposite to back then at the Tournament of Power, Lord Zeno and the High Priest had this time not blocked their ability to fly. So Beerus would at least not fall into the void. But he was more tired than he wanted to admit. Seeing the oversized spin with the fighting stage on top breaking apart in the middle, with the exhausted and beaten up surprised god of destruction standing on it, was actually quite the hilarious sight. And Beerus found himself stumbling in a way that would have been quite embarrassing, if it were not for the large energy barrier that suddenly formed beneath them, and was holding the ground beneath them in place. As Goku and Beerus looked around, they saw it was 18 who had stood up and was gesturing in their direction. "What do you think, 17? I have gotten better, right?" she asked. "Yes, you have clearly made progress with your barriers," 17 replied. Originally only he had possessed this ability, but 18 had learned to do it as well some years ago. Beerus meanwhile had regained his concentration and lifted off the ground, and he and Goku were flying back to the spectator ranks. "You can stop it now, 18, Beerus said to her. She did just that, and the two large broken parts of the fighting stage were instantly falling down into the void. Only the half-circled spectator rank stayed in place, with everyone on it, god and mortal alike, watching the crash. "Damn it, Goku, could you not been more careful?" Beerus called out. "You wanted me not to hold back," Goku replied, grinning. "That was fun," Zeno called out. "Yes, fun, especially the last part," future Zeno fell in. Then Beerus just started to laugh, and Goku fell in. "Okay, I admit it was funny," Beerus gave in. "By the way, Goku," Zeno said, "there is something we want to show you. And the others here too." He looked around at everyone from Universe 7, 11, 2 and 6. "Can you all visit us tomorrow?" "Of course," Goku replied. Many things had changed regarding Lord Zeno ever since the Great Battle. For once he did not longer feel the irrational need to erase people and universes. But an invitation from him was still one you did not refuse. "Of course, Lord Zeno," they all said. Zeno's palace one day later now. They were just watching the rest of the recording. Vegeta saw with some satisfaction that his counterpart had finally got his things together and joined the fight against Broly. But he was being overpowered just as quickly as the rest of them. In the end they all were lying beaten on the ground. They saw another particular disturbing scene in that Broly, who had temporarily taken down all his opponents, had followed Paragus, who was just trying to leave the planet in a space capsule, leaving his son behind. But Broly had caught him before he could start. They were watching as Broly crushed the capsule with Paragus still inside and then threw it out into the orbit. The Broly who was watching the recording remembered how his own father had died and how he had felt that day. He knew that Asparagus was a monster that made his own father look harmless in comparison. but he still clenched his fist at what his counterpart had just done. His Paragus might been far from a perfect or even good father, he admitted that. But for so many years he had been the only family Broly had. Recording. But the beaten down Z fighters were not giving up. They resorted to transferring energy to Goku, who was the last of them who was still able to fight. But it was only when Vegeta, who ironically still had the most energy of them because he had joined the fight last, finally also brought himself to transfer his to Goku, something that he saw as an personal affront, that it actually made a difference. They watched as Goku concentrated the energy, and landed one punch into Broly's stomach, that literally ripped through his flesh and left a large deep wound across his body, directly followed by a violent outbreak of green ki energy. Just before the meteor hit the planet, Goku and the others teleported away to the ship Piccolo had already started and that now moved through space. This was similar to Dragon Fist, Goku said about the last strike from his counterpart. He had concentrated all his energy on a single point. Indeed, Vegeta agreed. I hope this was at least the end of Broly in that world, Gohan stated. Sadly no, the Grand Priest replied. What? Gohan called out. His ki just exploded out of an gaping chest injury, and then the planet he was on was destroyed. How in the world did he survive that? Vegeta asked. Despite that Broly was indeed gravely injured and nearly died, he managed to form a ki barrier around himself that shielded him and allowed him to temporarily survive in space and flew away from the explosion with his last strength, the High Priest explained. He managed to reach another space capsule, get inside and press the start button. It was already programmed within course to Earth, and it crash-landed there some time later. Broly fell into a coma, and the life support of the ship kept him alive until he awoke again several years later. The recording now showed the capsule that laid inside a crater that was flowing full of water, which then froze to ice. Please tell me that our counterparts had managed to stop this guy, Gohan said. They did, the Grand Priest told him. The scene changed once again. It showed now Goku, an older teenage Gohan and Goten, who must have been born during the time that had passed and seemed to be around 7 years old, like during the fight against Bu, standing beside each other, and each of them was firing a Kamehameha. 3 Kamehamehas they had fired to stop a large energy globe. A globe that Broly, who was standing in his berserk/legendary form at the top of a small mountain, had formed and that he had aimed down at the planet. The 3 Super Saions, despite having combined their power, were still struggling to hold it back. That was great! Both Zenas called out. Yes. Toppo yelled as he saw Broly's counterpart being eliminated. Take that Broly bastard, Caulifla acclaimed as well. Yes, go to hell Broly, Kale fell in. The other Broly of course, not you, she said to the Broly sitting before her. Don't worry, I completely agree, he replied. That timeline is better off with my insane counterpart dead, Broly said. What do you say, Lord Zeno? The Grand Priest asked. Do you think this timeline is fitting for your new tournament? I am not sure, Zeno said. I am not sure, future Zeno repeated. Maybe we should see more of it. Yes, maybe, Zeno agreed. Excuse me, Lord Zeno, 17 spoke up. Yes, 17, the 2 Zenas responded. If I may ask, is there a special reason behind why you want to have this tournament, like with the Tournament of Power? Some kind of test? Or are you truly just doing it for fun this time? You want to know that? Both Zenas replied smiling. That is a good question. Normally the gods present would have been irritated at a mortal questioning Lord Zenas' motives like that. But this was Android 17, one of Lord Zenas' personal advisors and also the champion of the Tournament of Power, who had wished their universes back. There are simply too many timelines, Zeno said. Too many, and that is not good, future Zeno added. Everyone in the room froze as they heard these words. When Lord Zeno had thought that there were too many universes, he had supposedly decided to erase 8 of them back then, which had finally led to the Tournament of Power. And now he was talking about entire timelines that were too many. But Zenchan, though, you said you will not erase worlds anymore? Goku asked. We will not, they answered. But we were thinking about putting the planets and people of one timeline into the other, and then erasing the empty one. Would that not mean that there would be 2 Earths and Namex in one universe? Goku asked. Every timeline has 12 universes, the High Priest explained. There is not reason why a universe 10, 2 or 11 should not get a Earth or Namek in them. Oh, I see, Goku said laughing. We have labeled the timeline you have just been seeing Timeline 5, the Grand Priest told them. Your own is Timeline 0, he explained. You should know that more and more timelines has been created. If even more are formed, It might destabilize the entire multiverse and lead to chaos. It might also cause Demigrid to reawaken, but we had promised not to use time travel anymore after the last time machine was destroyed, Goku said. You have, but the same does not go for your counterparts from other timelines, and other people, the Grand Priest responded. We have already told the gods from the other timelines to keep their eyes open for mortals who could create time travel technology, and warn them about using it. But new timelines were still appearing. I see, Vegeta stated. So it was not only Bulma? No. But I admit that your wife had invited her time machine in many different timelines and has to a good part contributed to the problem, the High Priest said. We have already occluded the timelines 1 to 4 and decided not to interfere with them. The first reason is mostly that they are very stable and new time travel is unlikely to occur in them. The mortals in them, or at least your counterparts, also already had contact with the gods and are informed about the prohibition of time travel, he explained. With Timeline 5, however, Lord Zeno has not decided yet. We would like to hear what you all think. This is not so much about who wins, you want to see how these timelines react to each other, 17 concluded. Very smart, 17, the High Priest replied. Does this mean that there will be another prize for the winner, like another wish from the Super Dragon Balls? 18 asked. Of course, the Zenus replied. A tournament needs a price, and if the winner makes a completely malicious wish, like destroying or enslaving a few universes, you will erase him and keep the wish from being fulfilled, 18 stated. The two Zenus and the High Priest were just smiling at her. There are however still many other candidates to choose from, the High Priest mentioned. The screen before them now split up into SI sections, each of them showing a different scene. On the upper left they saw Son Goku as a Super Saiyan 4, although a regular one without God Ki, fighting against someone they recognized as its Sifra Parasit BB. Right below that they saw Future Trunks standing before 17 and 18 with a remote controller in his hand. The upper middle section of the screen showed Gohan fighting a large number of what looked like robotic versions of Cooler, and the lower one, Goku, Vegeta and Piccolo in a battle against androids 17, 18 and Saitin. At the upper right section they then saw Dr. Gero, with 17 and 18 at his side standing on top of a building they recognized as the Royal Palace on Earth. And finally at the lower section on the right, they saw a scene of a set of Dragon Balls cracking. They continued to watch more of the timeline that was labeled Timeline 5, in particular events that happened before, after or in between their counterpart S2 fights with Broly. A bit to their surprise, there were many more fights during that period than in their own timeline. Timeline 5 had its own version of the fight against Frieza on Namek, and the Cell Games and the awakening of Majin Buu, but there were also other threats to Earth or the entire universe. Sometime after Namek, Frieza's older brother Cooler showed up on Earth with his elite warriors to kill Goku and destroy the last Saiyans, but was defeated by Goku as a Super Saiyan. Well, I guess this is a serious difference, Gohan said. In our world we did not meet Cooler until years later. He had also never been part of Frieza's empire. Here it seems he and Frieza were sharing their rule. That is because in our timeline Cold had banished his elder son long ago because he did not meet his expectations, Vegeta reminded him. So he built up his own turf far away from his relatives. And became less of an asshole than them, he commented. But in this timeline here it was obviously different. So Universe 7 used to be ruled by an evil empire that belonged to this Frieza and his family, Toppo stated. And you have defeated them? Yes, equally, Goku replied. So you had more than one being like Frost in your universe, Kaba stated. 3 if you count their father King Cold, Vegeta stated. Honestly, I am not really sure if Frost has any living family members. He just used the accuse of keeping the peace to take over planets and build up his own version of an empire. So there might be others like Frost out there who have just not shown themselves? Caulifla theorist, maybe, Kaba said. The other audience members from Universe 6, 2 and 11 were only watching the events silently. While they all noted the terrible state Universe 7 used to be in, they didn't feel the need to especially comment on it. You let a planet-destroying empire led by someone like this Frieza rule a good part of your universe? Belmont asked him. How could you think that was a good idea? Frieza seemed useful at one time, Beerus stated. In hindsight, of course, he was going too far. In hindsight, you are always smarter, right, brother? Kampa remarked sarcastically. I don't remember you doing anything about Frost either, Beerus responded. I guess that is why Universe 7 and 6 had some of the lowest mortal levels back then, Belmont commented. Beerus sighed. Let's not longer talk about it. Timeline 5. Cooler was seemingly killed. But it turned out his remains, that had been blasted into space by Goku's attack, including his brain, had been found by a dangerous planet-sized artificial intelligence called the Great Giddy Star, that resurrected Cooler and merged with him, with Cooler's brain becoming the sentient intelligence guiding the construct. Cooler and the Giddy Star then went on to attack New Namek with an army of mass-produced robots and robotic copies of Cooler himself. What a plain the robot Coolers! They had seen a version of Gohan fight on the screen before in another timeline. The robot's goal was to kill all life on the planet and absorb their energy to fuel the Giddy Star. Like they were planning to do it to other planets as well, as Cooler and his robot minions stated themselves. In the end, they had captured Goku and Vegeta to attempt to absorb their energy as well. But the two Super Saiyan turned the tables on their enemy and overloaded it with their own energy. Unable to stop the process, the Giddy Star was destroyed and Cooler killed for good. Yes, that was a good one, Caulifla called out as she saw the giant artificial construct imploding. She smiled. Of course, I could have easily blown the entire thing away instantly. We all could, Goku told her. Our other selves there are not nearly as strong as we are now. And you Universe 6 Saiyans are much stronger than we used to be, Vegeta admitted. But that only proves how much we improved. He smirked as well. If you say so, Caulifla replied sardonically. Timeline 5. What followed net was the arrival of the androids. As far as they could tell, it happened very similar to their own timeline. The screen showed them a fight between Vegeta and 18 that looked very similar to the one in their own world. With 17 and Saiyan at one side and Piccolo, Krillin, Tien and future Trunks on the other, watching. Can we jump over that? Vegeta asked. We already know this fight and nobody is helped by seeing it again. 18 sent him a straight look. They both knew he just didn't want everyone watching how she broke both of his arms. The scene with his other counterpart panicking in the fight against Broly had already been humiliating enough. Alright, the Grand Priest stated. We will jump over this part. They continued to watch. Timeline 5. The screen switched to the scene of Krillin confronting 17, 18 and Saiyan. Much to their surprise, however, it turned out that this version of 17 and 18 did not want to hunt down and kill Goku. They also did not want to destroy cities and kill humans like their future counterparts did. Instead, it seemed they wanted absolutely nothing. Well, we just wanted to get rid of Jero, since he acted like he owned us. And then get away from here and do our own thing. Whatever that is, 17 said. He sound so sure himself what equally this thing was. But your friend just had to come after us and ask for a fight. And he seem to take no as an answer, 18 added. So goodbye, 17 said. By the way, if Son Goku is interested in a fight, he should just show himself. We will be there. I have to kill Son Goku, Saiyan stated. And we will not keep you from it, 17 replied. But you will have to do it by yourself. With that they left. 18 placed one on Krillin's cheek, like she did in their world, before she joined the others and they flew away. Maybe we should have done that as well, 18 said in the present. Probably, 17 replied. Is that how you fell in love? Brienne asked confused. That is really much different than in our world, Sanka said. I mean, you just fought his friends and then ed him. We used love in a fight as well, but, look, 18 responded, this is not how we fell in love. That came later. I just ed him because I found him interesting. Timeline 5. What followed was a fight against the androids 13, 14 and 15, who Dr. Jero's computer had activated. Without Cell, they had not found out about that computer until later. Then some time later followed first fight against Broly, and then Cell came. In this timeline, the time machine in that Cell arrived had never been found. And Kami had already merged with Piccolo without having a successor as Earth's guardian, so his appearance took them all completely by surprise. Entire towns had been wiped out without anyone knowing who or what was responsible. And worse, since Dr. Jero's computer had never been destroyed, Cell used it as help to locate 17 and 18. He found them, taking them completely by surprise and absorbed them without anyone being able to stop him. The rest played out very similar as they knew it. Cell's announcement, the Cell games, Goku's death and Gohan defeating Cell, and Mr. Satan taking the credit. Then Broly's second coming 7 years later. The events of the awakening of Bu a short time later played out very similar as Goku and the others knew it from their own world. Too similar, in fact. They all watched with gritted teeth as they saw Vegeta falling under the wizard Bad BD's influence, and firing at the stadium of the Budokai on Earth to force Goku into a duel. Even a few of their fellow audience from the other universes was deeply disturbed by this. especially when they heard that the Vegeta sitting next to them had done equally the same thing. Even more than the one on the screen showed that he could resist Babidi whenever he wanted and admitted that he willingly let himself fall under Babidi's spell. You don't need to tell me, Vegeta said quietly, I was a fool. I don't understand, Brienne said, why did you do that? You had everything, love, your family, a son. Why did you kill all these people and risk to throw that all away? Just to fight Goku, he had already agreed to do that anyway. Right, son Goku, so much. He had already agreed to fight you afterwards. So why did you do this? Her partner Su added. Indeed, you could have easily stopped that threat, and then had your fight with Son Goku after that, Toppo stated as well. Vegeta wasn't even sure how to reply to that. It was true, logically his actions had made no goddamn sense. It is something that you people would not understand, he answered. On planet Vegeta the Scions were raised to only care about power and follow the ones who possessed the most of it. Everyone who was weak was only meant to be either killed or taken advantage of. The Frieza force that controlled us was the same way. Family, friends, love, all that was seen as things that either didn't matter or that made you weak. The members of Universe 2 were looking at Vegeta in sheer disbelief at what he just said. How can anyone believe that? Hele stammered. That we're evil and twisted people and Universe 7 is better off since they were taken down, Kaioshin Pell said. Indeed, Vegeta admitted, even if many of my people could have probably changed if they were ever given the chance. You were forced to question your basic beliefs and found them to be wrong, Jiren stated. You were leading a life that was the exact opposite of what you were used to. But a part of you could not accept it, and just wanted to break out. Until you finally leashed out. They all were looking at him. What he had said was quite unusual for the usually stoic Jiren. You remember how I fired at the spectator seats of Universe 7 during the Tournament of Power? He asked Toppo. Yes, Toppo replied. I had been forced to question my own beliefs back then as well, Jiren reminded him. And I could not take it. So I acted against everything a Pride Trooper stands for and targeted bystanders. It seems the line between a hero and a villain is sometimes thin. We were all faced with our complete destruction back then. Belmod Universe 11's God of Destruction of all people, reminded them. They continued to watch. A short time later they watched how Vegeta sacrificed himself in an attempt to stop Buu, who had been released through his own fault, after knocking out Son Goku from behind, to keep him from interfering. That is the same technique you used to defeat me back then, Toppo noted. It had killed you the first time. Yes, Vegeta replied. The line between a villain and a hero is sometimes thin, indeed, Toppo contemplated. Timeline 5. They watched the events continuing. In opposite to the Buu battle they remembered, however, there was one fundamental difference. Here Gohan did not fail and was absorbed, along with Goten, Trunks and Piccolo. He defeated and killed Buu. That meant the Earth was not destroyed by Buu. But it also meant that Goku and Vegeta were not brought back to defeat him. The Namek Dragon Balls were used to bring back Buu's victims, but since he was technically not killed by Buu but by his own attack, Vegeta was not included. They both stayed dead, but it didn't end here. They were watching an event that happened about 1 year later. Part of it happened in the afterlife. It happened that one particular lazy ogre refused to clean up the storage tanks for the dark energy cleanse from the souls that were sent to hell, and as a result the tanks blew up with him standing right next to them. With the dark energy from countless thousands of evil souls washing over him and transforming him into a demonic being. The presence of this being was then interrupting the functions of the afterlife, trapping King Yema in his own palace, and damaging the borders to the world of the living. As a result, the living world and the afterlife were blending and souls returning and manifesting themselves back on Earth, and likely on other planets. Partly as ghosts, partly inside their old, often already decayed bodies, as zombies. The gods from all universes were gobsmacked at what they were just seeing. Even the high priest had a frown on his face. What? Beerus called out. The sheer incompetence. What in the world were these fools in the afterlife doing? Well, it seems Universe 7 is a mess in the afterlife too, Kampa commented loudly. Oh, shut up, Beerus replied. Was when we are back home, contact King Yema. Find out if this guy is still working for him in our timeline. If yes, tell him to fire him. I guess that is a good idea, Universe 7's Kaioshin stated. Meanwhile in the afterlife Goku, Gohan and a bit later Vegeta, who had been released from hell, were sent to fight the demon, who called itself Janemba, but he turned out too powerful for all of them. It was only when Goku convinced Vegeta to use the fusion dance and they, after a couple failed attempts, merged into Gogeta, that they were able to defeat him and things returned to normal. both on Earth and in the afterlife. I think we should stop here, the High Priest said. But what happened after that? Goku asked. Now Goku, we still have a few other timelines to look over, the High Priest reminded him. We cannot go over every detail of all of them. But if you want to know, you stayed dead, but Vegeta was brought back with the Dragon Balls a short time later. Your families lived their lives and joined you in the afterlife in the end. Is that enough for you? I guess, Goku replied. Lord Zeno, your verdict? The High Priest asked. No time travel, Zeno said. No contact to other timelines. No future, Zeno said as well. The timeline is quite stable. Little contact to the gods. Yes, Zeno agreed. I say let this timeline as it is. All right, the High Priest said. So it is decided. Timeline 5 will not take part in the tournament. Does any one of you have any other thoughts on this? He asked everyone watching. Well, it would have been interesting, Goku said. Father, remember, they are not doing this just because it is interesting, Gohan pointed out. Besides, I am sure the other timelines will be interesting too, 17 remarked. Timeline C. The net timeline they were watching was quite similar to Timeline 5, but even more to their own world. Nearly everything happened like in their own. Only the fight with Cooler happened as well in the 3 years before the androids. Here, however, he was killed by Goku for good and never merged with the Getty Star. Broly and Paragus, however, never happened. There was no Super Saiyan rampaging in the South Galley. Paragus did not come to Earth or found the High Priest any signs that he was ever leading his own army. It was as if they simply didn't teased. Maybe King Vegeta's assassination attempt had actually killed him, or he had sent Broly to planet Vampa in this timeline as well, instead of downright murdering him. The fights against the androids and Cell, Bojack and Bu all happened. The High Priest and the Zenus, however, did not bother to go through all the nearly identical events again, but just watched a few key points, like Cell and Bu's defeat. About 1 year after Bu, however, something happened that didn't happen in Timeline 5, or any other they had seen. The wizard Hoi appeared on Earth to free the hero Tapion, and with that the demon Hildigarn, who was trapped inside his body, and them both magically sealed inside a music bow. The residents of Timeline 0 had met Hoi and Hildigarn as well. However, several years later, when they were easily able to defeat them. Here, however, he was a deadly world-threatening foe, probably nearly as dangerous as Bu. Still, Hildigarn was finally defeated by this timeline's Goku using the Dragon Fist. It was, however, one small scene that happened a bit later that caused an uproar. It showed Bulma giving Tapion a version of her time machine, which she had obviously reverse-engineered from the one her future self had created, to travel back to his home planet 1,000 years earlier. The gods could barely believe what they were hearing. They were even more shocked when they heard that Bulma completely casually sang to her son Trunks that he could eventually visit his friend Tapion in the past. The Kaioshin and gods of destruction were all starring with oppression raging between gobsmacked and outraged. What in the world is that idiot doing? Beerus acclaimed. Are you calling my wife an idiot? Vegeta asked him. That version of her, yes, he replied. Using her time machine as carelessly as this. Well, this Bulma here obviously don't even know about your law against time travel, Vegeta pointed out. And that also because none of you ever told the mortals about it. He looked from Beerus to Shin and back. So she is not the only one to blame. Even without knowing that law, it should be obvious not to use something like a time machine so easily, Beerus responded. Like it is common sense to blow up a planet over pudding? Vegeta countered. What better reason is there to blow up a planet? Beerus said. A few need to be blown up regularly anyway. That is the duty of a destroyer. Enough of this, you two, the High Priest interrupted them. But I cannot say I disagree with Lord Beerus. By the way, as it looks, has Timeline 5 been formed by sending Tapion 1,000 years back into the past in the first place? What? Goku said. Are you saying Tapion had done something to change history? Gohan asked. It seems so, the High Priest replied. He might have done something to stop Hoi and Hildigarn to become a threat in the future, and that is why they had not appeared in Timeline 5. 1,000 years ago, that was also around the time that the first Super Saiyan appeared, Vegeta stated. Do you think Tapion's trip to the past could have also somehow changed the history of planet Vegeta and caused this version of Broly to become a threat to the universe? The High Priest sighed. It is good possible. But this device cannot see that far in the past of the other timelines. Of course, it could have also been something else than Tapion that caused Broly's reign of terror. Here you see why you should not interfere with the past, Beerus told them. Broly frowned. His insane counterpart might have not been nearly as strong as this Hildigarn, but the demon had been stopped at the first planet he was terrorizing. The other Broly had been running amok in the South Galley for decades. Whatever was the cause, it had not been a good trade for the universe. Enough, enough, they heard both Zenus saying. Let them take part in the tournament. We will tell all participating timelines not to use time travel technology in the future anyway, one of them stated. It seems we have a first participant, the High Priest announced. Let us continue. Hey, wait a moment, Caulifla suddenly said. Yes? The High Priest asked. It is just, we have so far only seen scenes from Universe 7. What about our universes in this other timelines? That's a good question, Compa said. Since it was Universe 7 where the time travel technology was developed, it is of course where the most difference are taking place, the High Priest replied. In the most timelines, in that you have never met Universe 7, your lives continued like it always had, with some variations of course. In most of them you three had discovered the Super Saiyan transformation on your own. You heard this, sis, we did it on our own, Kale commented. Yeah, Caulifla responded. But if you want to, we can show you a scene from Universe 6 net, the High Priest declared. The scene you will now see happened practically identical in timelines SI and 7. Timeline C/7 Universe 6. The scene played at a place Cabba recognized instantly, Frost's old office in his headquarters. And in this moment this timeline S version of Cabba came into the room, with a squad of Sadala Defense Force soldiers in his back. Frost, he said. Cabba, what can I do for you? The Frieza lookalike from Universe 6 responded. We have defeated the raiders that were attacking the planets in Sector 72D. We have found proof that you are the mastermind behind these attacks. Now, how can you think something like this about me? Why would I do something like that? Frost responded. We have been protecting the universe together for so many years. That is obviously some kind of setup. Frost, Cabba said, the truth is we have been suspecting you for nearly a year now. We have been investigating you all this time. I had hoped it was not true. But now, it is clear that you had from the beginning staged attacks to take over planets under the pretense of protecting them. I see. So I guess the game is up now. In one moment Frost's oppression turned from friendly to menacing. In the blink of an eye he raised his hand and fired a death beat that hit one of the Scions who came with Cabba and pierced through his chest. Cuke, Cabba called out as he saw his comrade fall. At the same time a group of Frost's guards came running in from the other parts of the building. I have to say you Scions had been useful the entire time, Frost stated, useful fools. Especially you Cabba. Just then Cabba could not longer hold back his rage. His ki suddenly raised more and more, and with an angry growl from him, his hair turned golden. You, he said in a cold voice, and he lunged forward and punched Frost right into the face, while his comrades were fighting Frost's guards. It did not last long. Cabba's Super Saiyan was just too strong and too angry. Frost used one of his poisonous needles to step Cabba into the arm. But the Super Saiyan reacted by shooting a blast through his opponent's body right before the paralyzing effect of the toin worked. Both sank down, Frost dead but Cabba merely paralyzed. You got him, Caulifla said to the Cabba sitting in the audience. This is what would have happened if I had not been told about Frost's deception when we met Universe 7. Cabba asked. Yes, the High Priest answered. Despite everything, Cabba could not really imagine himself killing Frost. And he knew Cuke as a fellow warrior. They were not equally close friends, but seeing him die like this, and how many others had died when the Sadala Defense Force and Frost's henchmen clashed with each other, things are better how they happened in our world, Cabba remarked. Here Frost was actually removed without people dying. The next scenes came, this one's again from Universe 7. And they saw that for all the similarities that I did in Universe 6, Timelines C and 7 were actually quite different. Timeline 7 was a future timeline. And so were Timeline 8 and 9 that followed. Of course, they had seen multiple versions of future Trunks, and all of them had their own version of their future where they came from. It was only logical. They all sat in their seats with deep scowls on their faces, especially 17 and 18 themselves, as they watched the future versions of the two androids standing on top of a building and firing a rain of ki blasts down at a city, hitting random people, just like entire crowds, buildings and vehicles alike, killing what were probably tens of thousands within minutes. Aside from 17 and 18 themselves, it were also in first line the Universe 2 group who was deeply unsettled by seeing their friends and saviors acting like this. Timeline 7. They watched one version of future Trunks try to find his Timeline S version of Android Cytine, only to find out that he had been destroyed when the two androids blew up Jero's lab. Years later, the same future Trunks joined forces with the Galactic Patrol and fought the Tsufra creation called BB. Timeline 8. Another future Trunks found Cytine having survived the implosion, and he reactivated the android who became his ally. The same future Trunks a few years later met Vegeta's brother Tarbal, who came to Earth. And every time the two Zenus made their decision which timelines they wanted in the tournament, and which not. Based on what they were not even sure if it were logical standards or just casual whims. It was, however, the net timeline 9 that really caught their attention. In first line, the one of 17 and 18. It was a version of the future timeline where Cell killed Trunks and stole the time machine to travel back into the past. And every time the two Zenus made their decision which timelines they wanted in the tournament, and which not. Based on what they were not even sure if it were logical standards or just casual whims. What followed, however, was that this timeline's Bulma did not just accept this. She had a spaceship and had found out the coordinates of New Namek. So she traveled there on her own and used their Dragon Balls to wish back Trunks and all the innocent people killed by the androids. Vegeta had a deep smile on his face as he saw what this version of his wife was doing. It was, however, something that they knew the mother of the future Trunks they knew, who had visited their own timeline, could never do, because he had told them in his future the Wizard Hoi had destroyed New Namek before he came to Earth. Timeline 9. They were, however, completely shocked as the net scene appeared and they saw two of the people the Dragon Balls had just brought back, that timeline's version of the androids 17 and 18. Even more so when the two resurrected androids suddenly seemed to have a 180-degree change in their personalities. They were actually avoiding other people instead of killing them and made no hostile move against anyone. Timeline 9. Haven't we done enough? The 18 on the screen said. Hey, that wasn't us. You have heard what that big red guy said, obviously talking about King Yema. We were being controlled, 17 replied. Damn it, Dr. Gero really got us, didn't he? He said a few moments later. I bet he is laughing on us. Their 17 and 18 were watching with deep frowns on their faces. Something about this scene seemed to deeply unsettle them. Maybe even more than when they had seen their counterparts kill masses of people a few minutes earlier. Were these versions of you brainwashed or something like that? Brienne asked, somewhat confused, somewhat hopeful. No, I don't think so, 18 responded. I think it is something else. I believe that too, 17 said, but I am not sure yet. A short time and a few timelines they watched later, the Zenus had finally chosen SI timelines to take part in the tournament. They had just finished the choosing of the timelines for the tournament. With a few inputs from Goku, 17 and Gohan, and also Beerus, Helles and Kampa, Shin and Gawasu. The two Zenus had already contacted their counterparts in this SI timelines. And unsurprisingly, they agreed with them about the situation about having too many timelines and were excited about the idea of such a tournament. Now what was left was to choose the decision where the tournament would take place. I have an idea, Goku said. How about the planet of the Grand Kao in our universe? He suggested. He is already holding tournaments every few years and has a large arena to fight. That sounds good, Zeno said. Yes, it does, future Zeno agreed. I see, the High Priest considered. And since the focus of the tournament will be on Universe 7, with most of the participants coming from there, it might be an ideal place. It actually sounds like a good idea, Universe 7's Kaioshin Shin said. I have been visiting one of the tournaments the Grand Kao was holding before. And he would certainly be honored to have you and the others here as his guests, Lord Zeno. Does anyone here disagree with this idea? The High Priest asked the other gods present. Universe 11 would also be an option, Belmod suggested. We also have large fighting arenas for the Pride Troopers to train and show their skill. So has Universe 6, Kampa cut in. We could hold the tournament as well. Well, on the second thought, yes, Universe 7 might be better, since most of the fighters will come from there, Belmod said, grinning at Kampa. Hey, Kampa called out as he realized that Belmod had just completely undercut him. Anyone else? The High Priest asked. Nobody said anything. No. Then it is decided. The tournament will take place on the planet of Universe 7's Grand Kao, he declared. The two Zenus nodded. Then all what is left is for the other timelines to choose their participants, the High Priest said. Timeline 0, Universe 7, planet of the Grand Kao. What? The Grand Kao of Universe 7 cried out as he heard what Shin, Lord Beerus, Wiz and Kibito, who had just arrived, said to him. Lord Zeno? As in the ruler of all universes? A tournament between different timelines? And he has chosen my planet as the fighting ground? Yes, Shin replied. A few other people, that included the South KO, several long-dead fighters who were allowed to keep their bodies in the afterlife, and several servants of different races, were looking equally shocked as the Grand KO himself. Is there any problem with this? Beerus asked. Problem? Problem? The eccentric Grand KO with the sunglasses actually shouted, Of course not. That will be the greatest tournament of a time. He yelled the last part so loud that several servants and afterlife warriors in a distance around them halted in whatever they were doing and looked around to them. The net day. A short time later, the two Zeniths, moving by floating through the air and closely followed by the high priest who was walking after them, were entering another room inside their palace. Inside, sitting in a half-circle of throne-like chairs, were more versions of Zeno. In opposite to them, however, these other Zeno did not have their own versions of the high priest with them, who had stayed behind to take care of everything in case something happens in their timelines. Instead, one of their guards were standing at each of them's side. Hey, the two Zeniths greeted their counterparts. Hey, 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 they were greeted in a choir of their own voice in return. My lord Zenith, the high priest, greeted them. I see you have all arrived. You will all stay here as guests of our timeline that we have labeled Timeline 0. If there is nothing else, we will now move to the planet where the tournament will take place. I have a question, one of the other Zeniths said. You are right, there are too many timelines. But what would we do if our own timeline loses and is not longer there? He asked. You can go to another timeline and the Zeno there and become friends with them, future Zeno said. Like we did, Zeno confirmed. They both raised their right arm. The other Zeniths smiled at the idea. By what they saw of this too, it seemed fun to have another one of themselves around as friends. Timeline C, around 23 years after the Cell Games, 16 years after Bu. For the inhabitants of the planet Earth, both the regular and the superhuman ones, it had been a completely normal day, until now. As this timeline's Kaioshin Shin and the elder Kaioshin, Lord Beerus and the angel was appeared in the sky over the planet. This version of Shin, however, was still merged in a fusion with his servant Kibito. So this is the planet Earth, was said to them. Yes, the Kaioshin replied. That means the Kaioshin and Kibito have been here before. The most powerful mortals of our universe life on this planet. He remembered how they had fought against Majin Buu years earlier. Son Goku, Vegeta, Gohan, Trunks and Goten, Vegeta falling under Babdi's influence but then sacrificing himself in an attempt to stop Buu. The Z-Sword the elder Kaioshin freed after being trapped in it for ages, the fusions, and finally how Goku had been restored to life and defeated Buu. But that was a long time ago, at least by mortal standards. Now another line of battles had happened over just a short time. First the parasitic Super Creation BB, then the fused android Super 17 and finally the Shadow Dragons. The Shadow Dragons had been 7 monstrous dragon-like beings that had been created as the result of the Dragon Balls being corrupted by negative energy. Now the battle against them had just been over for a short time. Now the Dragon Balls were gone. And so was Son Goku, or at least he was until now. At the end of the last battle, as the last Shadow Dragon had been defeated, the corrupted Dragon Balls had been absorbed into his body and he left together with Shillong to another realm. For the time the Dragon Balls would need to completely recover and the negative energy to dispel, which would have normally taken over 1 century. This would have also meant that Son Goku would have been unable to take part in the tournament. Not because they had been unable to reach him at the place where he had gone with Shillong. In fact, they had already made contact with Goku before they came here, but it would have been against the rules set by Lord Zeno. The Kaioshin remembered the ground rules Lord Zeno and the High Priest had given them for this tournament. Only residents of the mortal realm, no reigning gods, no people from the afterlife, no people working directly for a god of destruction or Kaioshin or trained by one. Which included Alof the Pride Troopers from Universe 11, or the Assassin Hit from Universe 6, or Lady Hele's personal group of warriors. It would only be mortal realm against mortal realm. Another rule was that Universe 7 had preference in the choosing of the fighters, since most of the variations between the timelines stemmed from it. It was completely allowed to fill the ranks with fighters from other universes if there were not enough, or the god who did the choosing found the fighters he found some of the fighters here lacking. But Universe 7 was to be given the first choice. Shin guessed this rules made sense given the nature of this particular tournament. Son Goku had not longer been a resident of the mortal realm, but for some reason Lord Zeno, the Zeno from their timeline, was very interested to have him on their team. So the angel was on his behalf offered to cleanse the negative energy from the Dragon Balls inside his body, so Goku would rejoin them in a short time. That were some really good news that Kaishin could bring his friends from Earth. And he himself was happy as well that Goku could return and see his friends and family again. But first he would inform them about the invitation to the tournament. Timeline number CS Kaishin Shin send out a telepathic call to the fighters to inform them about the tournament. Timeline 10 around 22 years after the awakening of the androids, 15 years after Majin Buu. For the inhabitants of the planet Earth, both the regular and the superhuman ones, it had been a completely normal day, until now. As this timeline S Kaishin Shin and the Elder Kaishin, Lord Beerus and the Angel was appeared in the sky over the planet. This version of Shin, however, was still merged in a fusion with his servant Kibito. It is here? Was asked them. Yes, the Kaishin replied. That means the original Kaishin and Kibito have been here before. The most powerful mortal fighters of our universe life on this planet. What is left of them anyway? Shin admitted. He remembered how they had helped them against Majin Buu years earlier. Both Son Goku and the artificial human called 17 had sacrificed themselves to defeat Majin Buu. But during that, Buu had also still managed to cause the death of the North KO and the destruction of his planet. Because of that, the being named Bojack, who the 4 KOs had sealed away centuries ago, had been freed. To stop his invasion of Earth and defeat him, even more fighters had died. Krillin, Yanchu, Tien Shinhan, Mutant Rashi, the Kaishin remembered their names, and worst of all, the young guardian named Dend. With that, the Dragon Balls were also destroyed and nobody could bring the people who died back. At least Vegeta, Gohan, Piccolo, Trunks and Goten were still around, they and another one. One Shin had once never thought he would be asking for help. But he was just about to do exactly that. During the fight against Buu, the Demon King Dabura had changed sides and helped them against the monster. Not only that, it seemed being freed from Bad BDS mind control and being confronted with the threat Buu represented to the entire universe and fighting against it side by side with them had completely changed his perspective on many things. He had maybe not equally turned into what Shin or most other people would have called a friendly person. But he had at least agreed to a kind of truce. He had also not showed much interest in returning to the demon realm and retaking control of it, and had stayed on Earth instead. Actually, there are still other very powerful fighters in this universe, Wiz commented. Only that they are criminals imprisoned by the Galactic Patrol. We will not need to rely on beings like this, the Elder Kaishin stated. If Lord Kampa does what he promised and presents us a few fighters on his own. And if he doesn't, there are still a few other universes. As much as I hate to rely on Kampa, Beerus agreed. It is better than getting our fighters right out of a prison. Well, probably at least. He could not help to make this jab against his brother. Timeline number 10 S Kaishin Shin once again send out a telepathic call to the fighters. The ones who were still alive. Son Gohan and his wife and his mother were at their family's home at Mount Pauzu. Vegeta and Trunks were at Capsule Corporation Piccolo at his house away from humans. And Son Goten at his apartment in West City. Good. But they were not enough to fill up the team of 10 members that Lord Zeno had asked for. So they would ask Kampa and maybe the other universe's gods for more fighters. Kampa had told them that he already had a few candidates in mind. Timeline 8 around 33 years after the awakening of the androids. This timeline was quite different than the first two. It was a future timeline. A world where Goku had died from a heart virus, where the androids 17 and 18 had destroyed most of the planet Earth and the human race. And where Trunks had traveled back in time to save Goku's life and find a way to stop the androids. Since the loss of many of Universe 7's best fighters, the Zenus had decided to contact the future timelines at a later point in their time when the other ones. To give other ones the chance to grow in strength in their stead. It were also not Shin, Beerus or Wiz who appeared to collect the fighters in this world. Here Shin and Kibito had died a few years ago in the fight against Babidi and Dabura to prevent the awakening of Majin Buu. And since the Kaishin and the God of Destruction were connected, Beerus died with him. Instead it was someone else who had come. What a mess, Kampa said. Beerus just had to get himself killed, so that we have to come to his universe as well. Well, technically it was Universe 7's Kaishin who got himself killed, his angel Vados pointed out. He should have taken better care of his Kaishin, Kampa replied. That's what he got for always sleeping for decades, he said with more than a bit of frustration. He would never admit that the death of his brother actually got to him. Anyway, do we have some good candidates here? Indeed there are, Vados stated. There are 2 Scions who have both reached the so-called Super Saiyan transformation right here on Earth. And a couple more quite powerful beings, and it seems there are a few more out in space. Good, let us just take them, and if there are not enough, take a few people from our own universe to fill up the team, Compa said. In some distance away, this timeline's version of future Trunks was having a sparring match with nobody else than his Uncle Tarble, Vegeta's younger brother, who had been exiled from planet Vegeta when he was young for being too weak, who had come to Earth several years ago to ask for help against a group of enemies from space, and to defeat a group of survivors from the Frieza Force, avenge the death of his wife. Both he and Trunks were fighting as Super Saiyan 2. This Tarble, had far surpassed any of the low estimations about the power he could reach a long time ago. Standing close to them and watching their fight were android Saitine and Trunks' daughter Gina. Gina's mother had been killed during the war against BB, just a few years ago. Just like so many other people during Trunks and Bulma's lives. And in opposite to the past, they were not longer able to simply bring back people with the Dragon Balls. Not far away from them were Trunks' mother Bulma and Android 21, were working together in the lab. It was then when they all heard the telepathic message from the Angel Vados. The same was happening in all of the SI timelines that were decided to take part in the tournament. In all of them, Kaioshin, gods of destructions and angels, were searching out and choosing warriors, good and evil alike. Timeline 0, planet of the Grand KO of Universe 7. Another couple of days later, the time of the beginning of the tournament was there. In a hurry, the fighting arena of the Grand KO's planet had been prepared for Lord Zeno's arrival. As much as it was possible, at least, the 4 KOs had come to greet Lord Zeno as well. Everyone was shocked, however, that not just one, or even the 2 Zenos currently ruling their reality, but 8 versions of the Omni King would appear. From their own and every of the timelines that participated, the KOs, with some help from Wiz, build up an extra section in the spectator ranks of the arena for the Zenus and their other guests, who were just arriving right now. The 2 Zenus of this timeline and the High Priest, along with the Zeno's group of advisors aka Goku and the others, then the gods of destruction of Universe 6, 2 and 11 and the group of Pride Troopers with them, and then the SI Zenus from the timelines that took part in the tournament, and their guards. Lord Zeno, Grand Priest, it is an honor to have you here, the Grand KO greeted them. May I introduce, this are the KOs of the North, West, East and South quadrants of this universe. Hello. Hello, the Zenus greeted them in choir. Goku, it is good to see you again, Master KO aka the North KO of Universe 7 said. I have heard little of you for the last few years. Ever since you and the others stayed with Lord Zeno. Son Goku, the Grand KO said, I have to say the same thing. Good to see you again. Will you take part in the tournament too? No, well, I mean a few versions of me probably will, but not this me. You know what I mean. He grinned. Of course they knew the nature of this tournament. As much as I hate not to take part in something like this time I am only spectator. They all were moving to their seats in the stadium. The Zenus and the High Priest, of course, in a large loge that had just been made especially for them with 8 thrones. With their timeline's own 2 Zenus in the center, and the others around them. Goku, Vegeta, Gohan, 17, 18, Broly, Jiren and Lord Beerus, Shin and Wiz were sitting in a line right below them, and the gods and warriors of Universe 6, 2 and 11 in the seats net to them. A few minutes more passed. Now the time for the arrival of the participants had come, and so the first groups appeared one after another around the large fighting stage. Each accompanied by at least one Kaioshin wearing a time ring and one angel assisting him, and most of the groups included very familiar faces for Son Goku and the others. The first group came from Timeline C. All in all 20 persons. 10 fighters and besides them up to 10 more persons who were allowed as visitors, as Zeno and the High Priest had explained. The group consisted of another Son Goku. This one was wearing a light blue shirt and yellow trousers, a Vegeta, who was wearing black leather clothes and had his hair cut slightly different from the one they knew, Gohan, then Goten and Trunks, who all looked not too different from the versions they knew. A dark-skinned young man with a mohawk, Timeline 0's Goku recognized him as the reincarnation of Majin Buu, and a bit surprisingly, Pan, who was wearing a bandana on her head, a red shirt and jeans, and a version of Super 17 and 18. They looked a bit different from the versions of their own timeline, but they easily identified the merged version of 17 and 18 with their artificially created doubles. But they were just standing net to the others without any sign of hostility. So it were obviously their normal personalities who were in control, not someone else. Besides them were also Chi-Chi, Bulma, Bra, Videl, Mr. Satan, Krillin, Marin, Mutant Rashi and Ulong present. The last 3 members of their team were not from Universe 7. It were Kaba, Caulifla and another scion they had never seen before. All three of them, however, were wearing the outfit of the Sadala Defense Force. Spectator ranks? No way! The caulifla from Timeline Zero called out. A version of me has actually joined the defense force along with Kaba and my brother. Your brother? Goku asked. The man net to our counterparts is Captain Renso of the Sadala Defense Force, Kaba explained. He is a friend of mine and was my mentor. He was not part of our team in the Tournament of Power because of an injury. He was also the one who advised me to recruit Caulifla instead. Well, it turned out for the best, didn't it, Kale? Caulifla said. They both smiled at him. 12 warriors? Gohan realized. There were indeed 12 capable fighters under them, but, a good observation, Gohan, the High Priest stated. But no, your counterpart and their Android 18 are only here as spectators and will not take part in the tournament itself. I understand, Gohan said. Moment, if their 18 has a super form like this, why should she not take part of the tournament? She should be one of their strongest fighters, right? Maybe she does not entirely trust herself with this form, their 18 suggested. I remember how it had been to be changed and controlled like this. If her transformation was not so long ago, she might not feel safe about her new power yet. But her brother is taking part, Goku pointed out. Just because they both have gained this new form, does not mean it is equally the same for them, 17 responded. He used the word gain with more than a little bit of strain. For them, becoming the super androids had not meant gaining anything. It was losing control of who they were. He reminded himself that it might not have been the same for their doubles. We don't even know for sure if both of them had been mind-controlled like we were, he reminded them. In the net group that arrived a few moments later, Timeline 8, the first person they recognized was Future Trunks. They already knew from the recordings they had watched a few days ago that this was a future timeline. And they had also seen Trunks finding and still intact Android 16, so they were also not surprised to see the tall red-headed android right next to him. But he was not the only one. Standing beside them were Android 21, a young girl with dark purple hair, Trunks' daughter, and Vegeta's younger brother Tarbo, and of course Bulma, who seemed to be the only person this group had brought along as a spectator. So it were only 11 persons as a whole. Like the last group, however, they also had fighters from Universe 6 with them, who had all been at the Tournament of Power. The first was yet another Kaba, who looked far older and somehow grimmer than either the one they knew or the one who had arrived with the first group, then the tall bear-like fighter Bamo, the metal man Vegeta, and the small pig-like alien Dr. Rota. But it was the last member of their group, who stood a bit aside from all of her team members, that completely shocked the spectators from Timeline Zero. Spectator ranks? That is impossible, Vegeta called out. How can't you hear? Gohan exclaimed. That is, even Goku was at a loss for words. So was the rest of their friends. Even the Kaioshin and gods of destruction who had met her before in person looked completely gobsmacked. Standing down their net to the fighting platform was the woman named Tawa. Only the Tawa they knew was a follower of Demigra, one of his fallen angels, who had originally been angels of Universe 13 to 18, before they had become corrupted and erased by Zeno. Only that, after at the climax of their last battle, Demigra had wished from the Super Dragon Balls to merge himself with Lord Zeno, merge them across all timelines, into one being. He had been stopped and his consciousness inside Zeno went dormant, and so his angels went dormant as well. The unconscious remaining fallen angels had been sent back to the universal void where Demigra had been contained before. And yet the woman standing down there was looking nearly equally the same, the face, the white hair, the light blue skin, even the red catsuit she was wearing looked like something she would wear. Only her ears were somewhat different, larger and sharper pointed. You all seemed confused. So was I when I heard about this, I admit, the High Priest said. Then could you please explain it to us? Beerus asked, more than a bit irritated. The person you are seeing before you is Tawa, a demon from the demon realm and sister of the demon king Dabura, the High Priest said. Dabura never had a sister, Shin stated. Not in your timeline, no. And not in most other timelines. But in a few it seems he had, the High Priest replied. You cannot believe that this is just a coincidence, 17 said. No. Maybe you can figure it out yourself? Demigra, 17 stated. Yes, the High Priest said. But how? Goku asked. Demigra had wished for him and Lord Zeno to become one being, over all timelines, and he had absorbed the power of the Super Dragon Balls. That gave him nearly complete influence over space, time and matter. The only thing holding him back was that he had to share this control with Lord Zeno, the High Priest pointed out. However, Even Lord Zeno is not completely sure if he knows every detail Demigra had done or changed in the multiverse. Yes, it is sometimes hard to remember, future Zeno told them. And it will be like that again if he should ever reawaken, present Zeno said. They all remembered this time. And they fully hoped it would not happen again soon. Even now, with his conscious mind mostly dormant, the High Priest continued, he could still have some influence. Not fully aware, of course. You mean like he is dreaming? Gohan asked. Maybe not equally, but quite a good comparison, the High Priest replied. And you mean Demigra has somehow manipulated reality to create a copy of his servant? 17 questioned. It is the best explanation I can come up with, the High Priest stated. Anyway, we should better keep an eye on her, 18 said. Down in the arena, the two just arrived groups greeted each other. Trunks, the Goku from Timeline C, called out. It is nice to see you again. Goku? Future Trunks replied. How are you, son? Vegeta asked him. Father, he replied, it seems you have met me before. Yes, Goku said, first when you had warned me about the androids and gave me the cure to the heart virus. And then when we had been fighting against Cell later. Accused me, but the Goku Iniwa died during the Cell games, Future Trunks pointed out. Yes, that actually happened to me, Timeline C, Goku replied. But I was restored to life a few years later to fight another monster named Majin Buu. I understand, Future Trunks said. So you might actually be the same timeline I had visited back then. The wizard Bad Beatty had appeared in his timeline as well, with the intention to awake this monster. Yes, that is actually possible, Goku replied. Hello, Trunks, Gohan greeted him. Gohan, Trunks said. The last time he had met Gohan in the past, he had been a child. This time, however, he was older than the one who had been his teacher had ever the chance to become. Future Trunks was not quite sure what to say. In this moment, however, the third group appeared, the one from Timeline 9. The one thing it had in common with Timeline 8 was that Trunks was standing in the center of their group, another version of Future Trunks. He looked very similar as the first one, except that he was wearing a goatee and seemed around the same age. But with the people around him, there were more than a few differences. While they had as well Bulma and Android 16 with them, there were also their versions of Android 17 and 18. Not only that, net to them was also an alien woman who had been part of Bojack's band of fighters, and a young girl who looked quite similar to 18, but also a bit like Trunks and with his hair color, and two boys, one who could also be Trunks' child and another who looked similar to the alien woman, and a bit like 17. The rest of their group consisted of other versions of Bamo and Automagetta from Universe 6, who were also part of Timeline 8's team. This seemed to be a pattern that, after Universe 7 they went to their twin universe Universe 6 to fill up their ranks. The presence of 17 and 18 was not so much of a surprise to the people from Timeline 0 on the spectator ranks. After all, they had already watched a few glimpses of these timelines and knew about the androids being resurrected by the Dragon Balls with completely changed personalities. But these children, Future Trunks and 18 a couple? Some of them thought. The thought seemed outlandish given what the androids of his timelines had done. The idea of 17 being with Bojack's former henchwoman on the other side was not so far off. This other Future Trunks and his teammates were looking at the other two groups for a moment. Gohan, Father Goku, he said, pretty similar to his counterpart. Then, however, he was looking at someone else. You keep very dangerous company, he said to his counterpart, looking towards Tawa and 21. Most other members of his team were. The same could be said about you, the other Trunks responded with eyes on 17 and 18. Look, I know what you are thinking, Timeline 9's Trunks said. The Dragon Balls have accidentally brought them back when my mother wished back all the innocent people who had died after I killed them. They are now free of any of Dr. Gero's programmings. You might find it hard to believe, but their minds were controlled by this programming the entire time, and they are completely different persons since then. My name is Lazuli, Android 18 said to him. I am Lapis, 17 introduced himself. You are right, Trunks from Timeline 8 said. I find it hard to believe. So did I in the beginning, Timeline 9's Trunks replied. But believe me, they are different persons and not responsible for what happened. You and her? Timeline 8's Trunks asked. Yes, Trunks replied. This are our daughter Islet and our son Shores, he said. My wife Sanya and our son Joiku. Lapis introduced the alien woman and the other boy. Spectator ranks. Meanwhile, the Z-Fighters from Timeline 0 had been listening to their entire conversation with the help of Wiz staff. This are not us, 17 said quietly. What do you mean? Goku asked. Dr. Gero did more than just program us, 17 said. He kidnapped 2 human teenagers and erased their memories and then had completely reconstructed our minds. Who we are, that is pretty much the result of Jero trying to form us into what he wanted us to be against our attempts to resist him, plus whatever is left of the humans we were created from. But they are not us, 18 agreed. Lazuli and Lapis are dead and gone, she stated. The dragon must have somehow resurrected the humans we once were inside our android bodies. The thought sometimes haunted them. Were their old selves maybe still there, trapped somewhere in their subconsciousness? I am sorry, Gohan said, but are you really sure that you are not maybe still the same persons at your core? Just with different memories and abilities? Neither 17 or 18 said anything for a moment. The truth was they did not want to be Lapis and Lazuli, no matter if in some sense they were or not. Saying they were Lapis and Lazuli was saying they had their entire lives taken from them, had their childhoods and identity erased. Why would they prefer to be broken husks of humans over whole androids who are their own beings? Arena. In this moment the last remaining timelines arrived. The group of Timeline 10 consisted of their versions of Vegeta, Gohan, Piccolo, Trunks, Goten, 18 and the demon Dabura, and also Kaba, Caulifla and Kale, and Bulma, Chi-Chi and a few other people as visitors. Timeline 11, however, like they could have guessed by the scenes they had seen from it, their group consisted nearly entirely of androids. More than half of them Jero-esque creations, with the Doctor himself standing in front of them, then 17, 18, 16, 13 and Mai? No, they all could sense she had no key, that was an android created from Mai. It was a timeline where Dr. Jero had conquered the Earth. The rest of their team came from Universe 3. This seemed somewhat fitting, given their robot and cyborg creations. The Universe 3 scientist Paparoni, the robot Bayara, the liquid being Maji Kao and the interstellar policeman Caterpesa. But what followed then was something nobody could have expected. Spectator ranks. There is only one other version of me here, but many 17s and 18 or Trunks, Goku commented. You have a habit of dying of a heart virus or sacrificing yourself to stop some monster, Vegeta remarked. In this moment Timeline 12 appeared. There was a group of SI mostly humanoid being who looked more or less like lizards or dragons. And with them one teal-skinned and green-haired very attractive woman. The Shadow Dragons, Goku and Pan from Timeline C said nearly at the same time as they saw them. Were they really stupid enough to invite them here? There, Vegeta asked. Everyone in the stadium could sense the sinister energy radiating from this group. And the other members of their group? Is this us? Senka from Universe 2 called out loud. But we were not meant to take part in Tournament, since we are working for Lady Helles, Sue stammered. Unless this version of us done to work for Lady Helles, Brienne said. And why are we dressed like that? The versions of Brienne, Senka and Sue down there were wearing completely black clothes and even shoes. Standing close beside them was another version of Vikal and Jaimes who obviously came as spectators. And similar to the Shadow Dragon they had a dark aura around them. Helles and Kaioshin Pel stared downwards, not quite able to believe it as they saw this version of their girls. High Priest, is this the correct group? Helles called out to him. I am not sure, he admitted. Even he seemed unsettled here. The Universe 7 Kaioshin from Timeline 12 had informed me that he was short on time, and could not send me a list of his warriors beforehand. But this, the Shadow Dragons or the obviously twisted version of Universe 2's warrior maidens however were not even as bad as the person who had helped to bring them here. A figure who looked identical to Son Goku, only with a different aura, wearing black clothes and with a time ring on his hand. Goku Black aka the KO Zamasu in a stolen body. Only, I thought we had erased that guy, Zeno said. Yes, future Zeno agreed. They did indeed even send out warnings and instructions to all other timelines to erase every version of Zamasu in instance after the disaster Black had caused the Zero Zamasu plan, as the High Priest had once called it sarcastically in a pun to Zamasu's plan to eradicate all mortals. So where did this Black come from when he shouldn't iced anymore? In this moment Goku from Timeline 0 had already teleported down right net to Black, with Vegeta following close behind him. Goku and Vegeta from Timeline 0 were now standing right net to Goku Black, and a very confused-looking Kaioshin from Timeline 12 who did not even fully seem to realize what was going on. Son Goku, Vegeta, Black greeted them. So we meet again. He had a sinister expression as he said this, but for Black this was nothing unusual anyway. Spectator ranks. Do you want to erase him, Lord Zeno? The High Priest asked him. I am not sure, Zeno replied. He sounded insecure. That alone was an alarming sign when it came to Lord Zeno. Something feels strange about him, future Zeno added, as if it is not a good idea to erase him. Yes, strange, the other SI Zenus present echoed in a choir. Demigra? The high priest suspected quietly. I think so, Zeno said, so we should wait and observe him for the moment? The high priest stated. Yes, Zeno replied. Yes, future Zeno repeated. I think this is a good idea, so I take it this Goku Black or Zamasu is a very dangerous person? The Grand Kao, who was sitting next to Shin and Beerus, asked. By what I heard, Lord Zeno himself gave the order to eliminate that guy. That puts it lightly, Shin responded. He was once a Kaioshin in training, who murdered the Kaioshin of Universe 10, stole his time ring, and used the Super Dragon Balls to switch his own body with Son Goku's. He then traveled to another timeline, where he and the Zamasu of that world who turned himself immortal together wiped out the mortals of many planets in Universe 7 and killed all the higher gods across the 12 universes by murdering the Kaioshin and the gods of destruction with them. Later they used the Patera to fuse into one, but Goku, Vegeta and another fighter were still able to beat them. But Zamasu's spirit survived and somehow managed to spread itself over the universe and destroy all life still left. Before Lord Zeno erased that entire timeline, the Grand Kao and the South Dash, West and East Kao sitting next to him were shocked at hearing the Kaioshin's tale about Black. While the Kaioshins and Lord of Destruction had been informed about Zamasu's actions some years ago, they and the other lower-ranked gods had not. They were however sitting too far away to have heard Lord Zeno's and the High Priest's short change about Demigra's possible involvement. Good, they were not even sure about this yet. They would not share their suspicions until they were more sure. If you allow it, the High Priest stated, I will go down there myself for a few minutes and take a closer look. Do that, Zeno told him. Arena, why are you here? Goku asked Black. I see you two have grown far stronger. Even more power that mortals like you should never possess, Black stated. That was never your decision to make, you idiot, Vegeta replied. That is only one of the many reasons Zeno gave order to erase you across all timelines. So how are you still alive? Black grimaced and gritted his teeth in anger for a short moment at this statement. But then his expression suddenly changed. It became completely blank for a few moments, and then he looked completely poised and controlled again. Goku, Vegeta, what is going on? Shin from Timeline 12 asked them. Kaioshin, do you even know who this is? Goku asked him. Why? Of course. He is you, Isn't? From another timeline? Timeline 12, Shin replied. Then he noticed where he was. Moment. This is the planet of the Grand Kao. When did we get here? And he for a short moment turned his head around and looked at the team he himself and Black had just brought here, and his jaw dropped. What? Shin exclaimed as he saw the Shadow Dragons and the three maidens from Universe 2. What are they doing here? He asked loud. The Shadow Dragons? And who are these girls? These are not the fighters we wanted to bring. He looked at Goku Black, who however only starred back, and then grinned. You are not Goku, Timeline 12, Shin said. You look like him, but your ki is different. Why have I not noticed this before? I think you have been tricked, Goku told him. Gohan and the High Priest, who had left Zeno's side for a few minutes given the situation, just landed next to them. Had he been under some kind of mind control? Gohan questioned. It seems so, the High Priest agreed. But Black never had such an ability, Vegeta argued. Or he would have for sure used them against us. Maybe this power did not came from Black himself, the High Priest suggested. He did not say it loud this time, but he was pretty sure that Goku and Vegeta knew what he was suggesting. Demigra. The fighters and guests from the other timelines were meanwhile watching the entire change with some confusion, and in many cases caution. Who was this Black? Why did he look like Goku? And why were this timeline's version of Goku and Vegeta and even the High Priest himself so concerned about him? Especially since they were completely related with beings like Dr. Gero, the androids, Dabura and Tawa and even the Shadow Dragons. Zamasu, the High Priest addressed him by his true name. Lord Zeno has made a decision. You can stay here as a spectator for now, he declared. He will decide how to deal with you later. I understand, Black replied stoically. You mean you will just leave him be? Vegeta asked surprised. I will explain the reasons to you very soon, but for the moment yes, the High Priest responded. Let us go back to the Loge. Wait a moment, Goku from Timeline C, who had just come over to them along with their Vegeta, said. Who is this Black and why does he look like me? And why are you so concerned about him? Yes, there are others here, Vegeta from Timeline C pointed at the shadow dragons. And you do not even seem to blink an eye about them. Or do you not know who they are? He asked impatiently. I assure you that we know about the shadow dragons, Vegeta, the High Priest replied. But like you said, Zamasu, or Goku Black as he is also called, is more dangerous than them. Really? The leader of the shadow dragons, Ulong asked. We will see about that. He was a tall bipedal dragon. With white skin, red eyes, 2 large horns at the top of his head and black spikes on his back, shoulders and elbows. 3 smaller spikes at his chin and 2 thin appendages on his lips resembling a mustache made it look like he had a beard. Just like his comrades, his appearance was in some parts bizarre and menacing. Only that in his case the menacing outweighed the bizarre by far, while in some other cases it seemed the other way around. A few of the dragon creatures were actually smaller than a normal person and looked more than a pet than a cosmic menace. I guess you already met us, Ulong said towards Goku and Vegeta from Timeline C. Well, I guess our worlds are pretty similar. You are wearing the same clothes as the Goku and Vegeta we had been fighting before we came here after all, he stated. Or could it be that we have already killed you in our world? Who knows? He asked sardonically. He showed them all a malicious smile. This and his words made it more than clear that this being was not only powerful, but also vicious and cruel. We have defeated you before, we can do it again, Timeline C Goku stated. You will see that things will be quite different for you this time, Ulong told him. We will see about that, Vegeta from Timeline C commented. Just at this moment, however, something else happened. One of the shadow dragons was not longer standing with the rest of them, a special one. It seems your Dragon Dash Princess is no longer with you, Timeline 12's Brienne commented drily. The teal-skinned, purple-haired, barefooted woman in a green dress called Ulong was not longer standing with them, and instead moved to the other teams. Where did she? The orange-skinned Nova Ulong asked. One look around answered his question. She was standing right before the group from Timeline C, and she was angrily staring at one of them. But to everyone else's surprise it was not Goku, Vegeta, Gohan or another Scion or even Ub or one of the androids. It was, you damn pig, she growled angrily at a completely shocked and terrified Ulong. It is all your fault. Watching this, the members of Timeline C, but also some of 8 and 9 were powering up. A few minutes earlier point of view of Timeline 8 and 9, the Timeline C and 8 and 9 with their 2 versions of future Trunks were standing close together. At least the mommers of them from Universe 7. Their comrades from Universe 6 were not really talking much with each other. The older version of Kappa from Timeline 8 however was looking over at the younger version of himself from Timeline C and at Caulifla and Renso. So in their timeline Caulifla was still alive, he thought. Look, future Trunks from Timeline 8 said to his counterpart from Timeline 9, I don't know what appearances you had with 21 and Tawa, but I found 21 deactivated in a lab, just like Saiteen. And she has been a trustworthy ally since then. She is actually very peaceful for an android. She and Mother also work very well together. I can confirm that, the Bulma from Timeline 8 told them. Both mother and son were both still outnerved by the presence of the androids 17 and 18 in the other group. And even more by the fact that the other future Trunks and 18 were apparently a couple and even had 2 children. All of them had been warned beforehand that things in the other timelines could be quite different. They were not even the only versions of 17 and 18 here. Trunks was looking at the ones from Timeline C and the others sitting up at the spectator ranks. But they, as they were told as they were brought here, were versions of the ones Trunks had met in the past, who he had come to see as completely different beings. These ones, however, were from a timeline that was nearly equally like his own. But if what their counterparts were saying was true, it were not even really them, but that another personality had been brought back with the Dragon Balls. Sadly, it is quite different in our world, her counterpart Bulma from Timeline 9 replied. 21 had the knowledge of a scientist, but she was dangerous and insane. Actually, she and Tawa were under the greatest threats we had seen, Timeline 9 Future Trunks stated. Well, about Tawa, Timeline 8's Future Trunks said, I do not even really know her. We have just been told by this angel named Vados that she will be part of our team, and that she is the sister of the demon Dabura. But you know about Dabura, I guess? Timeline 9 Future Trunks asked, and about Babidi? Yes. I killed them both actually, Timeline 8 Future Trunks replied. They came to Earth to awake the demon Bu. But I stopped them before that. They all were nearly instinctively looking over to Tawa, since her teammate Trunks had just admitted to killing her brother. But she just showed everyone a stoic expression. There was no telling what she was thinking. And do you know Broly? Timeline 8 Future Trunks asked the members of Timeline 9. He was looking upwards to the spectator ranks as he said this, where a version of the same Scion was just sitting right next to the Z Fighters, 17 and 18 and Lord Zeno, and the High Priest themselves. You can say that, Lapis Timeline 9's version of 17 replied. We fought against him a long time ago, Timeline 9's android Cytine stated. We all barely survived that fight. So did we, Timeline 8 Future Trunks told them. Me, Tarbell, and 21 defeated him together, barely. You know, the sight of a version of that maniac sitting peacefully side by side with Father, Goku and Gohan now nerves me nearly as much as the idea of you and 18 being lovers. Call them Lazuli and Lapis, Timeline 9 Future Trunks stated. Believe me, who the Dragon Balls had brought back are not the same people from before, quite literally. They have the personalities of the humans 17 and 18 were created from. Yes, he had said this before, Timeline 8's Future Trunks thought. It was just a bit hard to accept. In this moment Timeline 10 arrived, and the conversation from before was suddenly forgotten. Half of the group from Timeline 8 was staring at them, or at least at a certain person under their group who was standing very close to their version of Trunks, and also close to two people who were clearly younger looking versions of Prince Pilaf and Shu who were walking beside them. The Dragon Balls? Timeline C Goku said as he saw the younger version of the Pilaf gang. Probably the Bulma from the same timeline replied. The reaction from Timeline 8 however was another one. My, Timeline 8 Future Trunks said. Mom, his daughter Gina said. Their Bulma and Tarbell were staring at the black-haired young woman. Your mother? Iolite Future Trunks and Lazuli's daughter from Timeline 9 asked her alternate timeline half-sister. Yes, she died, Timeline 8's Future Trunks said. Could you not bring her back with the Dragon Balls? Iolite asked. I mean in my world grandmother had been able to locate new Namek and bring Den to Earth as new guardian. Did this not happen in yours? It did, Timeline 8 Trunks said. But that was the second time I died. And our Shillong at least cannot fulfill the same wish twice. And we lost contact to the Namekians. I see, Iolite replied uncomfortably. Stupid, she thought to herself. She had not meant to remind them of something like this. Remember, this is not our my, Timeline 8's Cytine told them. While she is obviously close to the Trunks of this timeline, she has never actually met this version of us. They knew he was right. The urge to walk over and talk to her was great. But at the same time both Timeline 8 Trunks and Gina were not even sure what to say. The rest of Timeline 10's group consisted of Vegeta, who was looking far more than he used to look, than the leather-clad one from Timeline C, Gohan, Piccolo, 18, Goten and Trunks, the trio of Kaba, Caulifla and Kale from Universe 6, and surprisingly Dabura. The same Demon King they had just been talking about a minute earlier. Timeline C POV. I am not in this group either, Timeline CS Goku said. Can it be that I am dead in this world? That would not surprise me. You had been dead in ours several times as well, his wife Chi-Chi, who had come with them as a spectator, remarked. Luckily in our world you came back, she said then with a softer tone. Dad, Mom, the Gohan from Timeline 10 greeted them shortly. Well, I am happy to see you, Dad, even if you are not really the same. Then Timeline 11 arrived. In front of their group stood none other than Dr. Gero, with several of his androids behind him 17, 18 and Cytine, who were obviously still under his control, 13 and another Mai? But this version of her had no detectable key. That meant she was another android. This realization caused the Trunks of both Timeline 8 and 10 to send a deadly glare at this version of Dr. Gero, but they had been told the rules. It was not allowed to attack one of the fighters or guests from the other timelines. In an extreme case, you could even be getting erased if you broke that rule. Calm down, son. Remember what they told us about the rules, Vegeta from Timeline C said to the future Trunk from Timeline 8, and by attention to the Trunks from Timeline 10, who looked also enraged, but also held himself back. His expression suddenly turned blank. But nobody really paid attention to this. Timeline 10's Mai herself looked horrified that Dr. Gero had turned another version of her into an android. Do you think our son, or should I rather say sons, cannot hold themselves back? Vegeta from Timeline 10 asked his Timeline C counterpart. I'd rather not take the risk, Timeline C Vegeta replied. Now as Scion warriors our sons should know about discipline, shouldn't they? Timeline 10 Vegeta responded sardonically, as if he did not really care what Gero had done to his son's girlfriend. Have you not raised yours as a Scion warrior? he asked him. I am not sure if I like that version of you, Dad, his daughter Bra commented. Vegeta could not disagree here. It was not like he denied his own past. And maybe his counterpart had never fully changed. But he could not help it, something just felt off about this other Vegeta. The rest of Timeline 11's team consisted of a blue-skinned, white-haired humanoid, and a few other figures none of them recognized, most of them robots. Does anyone know who these guys are? Caulifla from Timeline C asked. Her counterpart from Timeline 10 was just about to ask the same thing. They are from Universe 3, the older Kaba from Timeline 8 said. I have met some of them before once. Then a short moment later, Timeline 12 arrived, and they all watched the reaction from their host to them, and especially to this double of Goku called Black. The visitors from the other timelines were in shock by what they saw from this Goku and Vegeta who were facing him. They were so far only in base form, but they were easily as strong or stronger than anything they had ever met. What in the world had happened in this timeline for them to become this powerful? They all had already been given a short description of who was who on the organizers of this tournament aside from Lord Zeno himself and the High Priest, Lord Beerus and Whis and some of the other destroyers and angels, and also the Goku, Vegeta, Gohan, 17, 18, and of all people Broly of this timeline, who were close to Lord Zeno and who, along with the being named Jiren, had the title of his advisors. A title they had been given after they had assisted Zeno in a great battle and saved him, but given the power their Goku and Vegeta had just displayed. What kind of battle had this been? And who was the opponent? Point of view, Timeline C. But their hosts from Timeline 0 were not the only ones who reacted to this new group. The Shadow Dragons, they heard Goku and Pan from Timeline C saying, were they really stupid enough to invite them here? Timeline C, Vegeta asked. They both walked forward, closer to the newcomers, to both confront the Shadow Dragons and to talk to their own Timeline 0 counterparts. Point of view, Timeline 8 and 9, Shadow Dragons. Timeline 8's future Trunks repeated what they had said. You mean these creatures you had been warned about? His uncle Tarbalnet to him said. They are looking quite different from how I had imagined them, Timeline 8 Bulma stated. You know them? His counterpart from Timeline 9 asked him. It is a long story, but I had been warned about their possible appearance when I trained in the world of the Kaishin. Dragon-like creatures that are created when the Dragon Balls are corrupted by negative energy because there's someone made too many wishes, Timeline 8 future Trunks explained. They look quite strong, well most of them at least, Caulifla from Timeline C remarked, but as Super Saiyan we should be able to take them quite easily. I bet we could take most of them maybe even without transforming. She looked in the direction of Haze, Rage and Naturon Shalom. These three creatures at least didn't look dangerous at all. More like degenerated pets or something. We cannot be sure that they are showing all their power, Timeline CS Kaba reminded her. Or that anyone here does. He looked around to the other teams. I have to agree with Kaba, her brother Renzo said. Just like ourselves, many here might be hiding their true power. We should not underestimate anyone here. If you say so, Caulifla replied. I guess we will see it when the matches start. Always the careful one, aren't you, brother? Her counterpart Caulifla from Timeline 10 commented. I for my part cannot await to get my hands on this overgrown lizards, and everyone else here. If we go all out together, nobody in the multiverse can stop us, right Kale? Yes sis, Kale replied. And you are overconfident as always, aren't you? The older Kaba from Timeline 8 interrupted them. This attitude was part of the reasons that got you killed in my world, my love, he said. I was killed? Moment, what did you just call me? Timeline 10 Caulifla asked. Are you telling me you and I were actually together in your world? As if I would ever go for a SDF shrimp like him. She pointed at her own Kaba. Actually Kaba and I have been together for a few years, Caulifla from Timeline C said. And I would really appreciate it if you don't call my man a shrimp. I also often ask myself how could I ever fell for someone so arrogant, careless, irresponsible, and going out to get herself into trouble like you, old Kaba commented. Whatever, Timeline 10's Caulifla said. Now, during this conversation the others had watched the whole confrontation with Goku Black playing out. By what they overheard, either the Shadow Dragons or these three black-clothed young girls who were apparently from Universe 2 were even meant to be here. And then, while their Goku and Vegeta were over there talking with them, Oenus Shalong suddenly moved from her group and appeared net to Timeline C, threatening. Ulong of all people? The members from Timeline C powered up as they saw her. With Gohan, Trunks and Goten transforming into Super Saiyans, and even the two Super Androids at least keeping their eyes on her. Future Trunks and Tarble from Timeline 8 did the same, as did Future Trunks and Iolite from Timeline 9, with Lazuli and Lapis positioning themselves net to them. This woman? Dragon? Whatever she was quite powerful, they all noticed. She surpassed for Implemagin Bu in his strongest form. And there was no guarantee that she even showed them her whole power right now. The members of Timeline 8, who had never met Bu in person, compared her rather as significantly more powerful than BB's right-hand man General Rildo, but weaker than BB himself in an adequately powerful host's body. What? What do you want from me? Ulong cried out as he heard the dragon woman threatening him. I don't know what you are talking about, he acclaimed in panic. Oh yes, right, you have not the slightest idea what I am talking about, have you? Oceanus said in an outwardly calm tone, but with barely concealed sarcasm. My entire instance is a joke because of you and you don't even know about it, she then suddenly shouted at him, which caused the small pig-like shapeshifter to only panic more. What? He squealed. I have never even met you. You got the wrong person. Oceanus Shillong just stared at the pig angrily. I think not, she said. Gohan, Ub and Pan were ready to move to defend him, but before Oceanus could even do anything else, a barrier sphere suddenly appeared around her. Hey! The female shadow dragon called out surprised. In the net moment 18 from Timeline 0 appeared net to her. None of them had even seen her moving and, if they were honest, that put all of them on the edge. Especially the two versions of Future Trunks under them, for slightly different reasons. Oceanus tried to break free by punching and pressing against the barrier, but it showed no effect. Are you finally willing to calm down? Timeline 0's18 asked her. Yes, Oceanus hissed, still angry, but realizing there was nothing she could do. Then 17 appeared net to his sister just as fast as 18 did. And just like with her, the visitors from the other timelines could not follow his movements. Do you not know the rules? He asked her. Rules? Oceanus replied. This Goku black person has never mentioned any rules when he brought us, just told us about this tournament, and then dragged us here. And then I saw this damned pig that had ruined my instance. 17 and 18 were not the only ones who noticed her reluctance to say what Ikli Ulong had done. Well, one of the rules is not to attack any of the fighters or visitors outside of the matches, 18 said. So can I trust you not to cause any trouble if I release you and go back to your team? Yes, Oceanus replied. Ulong, what in the world have you done to that woman? Master Roshi asked him. I don't know, he assured her. I never even met her. Well, that does not equally sound like that, Bulma remarked. Your counterpart in her world obviously did, Chi-Chi commented. And if a woman is angry at you, it is normally for one certain reason, isn't it? Why do you think I am at fault here? Ulong exclaimed. Do you remember that this is a monster dragon who wants to destroy the world? He pointed at Oceanus. So why would you believe her over me? As Ulong looked at her once again, now that she was no longer a threat, he saw the detail that her feet were naked. Then he noticed her long teal equally naked legs beneath her knee-long green dress. His eyes went higher over her body. Despite the small detail of her being a dragon monster, she was actually not bad. Not bad at all, he thought. He was suddenly staring at her with an open mouth, looking like he was nearly drooling. Something that not only his friends around him noticed, but also Oceanus herself. She actually looked embarrassed as she realized that he was openly ogling her. You little bitch, she growled at Ulong. But she made no threatening move again. She knew it would be pointless. Chi-Chi, however, smacked him hard at the back of his head. This is equally why, she told him. Oceanus actually grinned a little as she watched this. So can I release you now? Timeline 018 asked her. Yes, Oceanus said. They were interrupted by the group of people approaching them. As you have just heard from my comrade, we have never been informed about any rules, Sinchilong said. So you cannot blame her for going against them. He came walking up to them, along with Nova Shillong and the dark-clothed versions of Brienne and Sanka from Universe 2. Walking right behind them were the Goku and Vegeta from Timeline 0 and C, the High Priest, and Goku Black in a small distance to the others. Not to attack members of other groups during a tournament should have been common sense, Gohan from Timeline C commented. Never do something stupid like this again, Black said to Oceanus. I don't remember taking orders from you, Oceanus replied. Then I am telling you the same thing, Sinchilong told her. We are here for a reason, Oceanus frowned. As you wish, she then said. How about this? Goku from Timeline C addressed Oceanus. You promised to go back to your team and leave Ulong alone, And I promise not to tell everyone why you are so angry at him. You know what this is about? Bulma asked him. Oenus actually blushed deeply now. You know, she said. Okay, I promise. She and her teammates walked back to where their team was assembled. You know, what you did was really stupid, Sanka from Timeline 12 commented. But at least we know now what happens when we make a move on anyone here. Oenus simply frowned. Now that we have dealt with this, issues, let us begin with the tournament, the High Priest, who had returned to his place next to Zeno, announced. You all have already been informed about the ground rules. Your abilities to fly through the use of energy will be disabled for the course of the matches. And I repeat, it is not allowed to attack spectators or for them to interfere into the fights. When a fighter is either ringed out or forfeits, he is out of the tournament. The first and second round will take place in the form that you mortals know as a battle royal, before it goes over to 1-1 fights in the quarterfinals, he explained. So for now, I ask every team, please choose 5 of your members, he stated. This 30 fighters will take part in the first round. And the last 4 of them standing will advance into the second round. An interesting form for a tournament, Timeline CS Goku commented. This means we can affect the final rounds depending on which fighters we choose now. Quarterfinals, which means in the second round 8 fighters will be left. That makes it technically more easy than the first one, Timeline 10's Gohan stated. Only that depending on which fighters win the first round, their timelines will have more fighters left in the second and have an automatical advantage, Timeline C Vegeta pointed out. To put it simple, Timeline 9's Trunks pointed out, you can either send in your strongest fighters in the first round and win a possible advantage later, but also risk losing them before the second one even starts. Or you can save your strongest for later, but risk having to deal with more opponents. A tricky system, his Timeline 8 counterpart commented. I guess it depends on how confident you are in your fighters winning, Lazuli from Timeline 9 said. After 10 more minutes, the teams had finally made their choices. For Timeline C, Pan, Kaba and Caulifla and Super 17 would take part in the first round. For Timeline 8 it were Future Trunks, Tarbell, Gina, Bamo, Dr. Rhoda. I am a bit surprised about you taking part. Timeline 9's Trunks asked his counterpart. You are the leader of your team, aren't you? And probably the strongest? What if you drop out here? It doesn't really matter that much, doesn't it? Timeline 8's Trunks responded. We are not really fighting for our lives and instance this time, don't we? He said. The worst thing is that our planet could be, relocated to another timeline and possibly universe. And maybe we could have other gods watching over us. That was true, Future Trunks from Timeline 9 thought. This was not really a matter of life and death. He and his family had, however, a good relationship with Master Ko and also the Kaioshin. And with the Namekians, of course. So they would really appreciate it if their planet stayed where it was. Besides that, I am pretty confident that I can be one of the last 4 fighters, Timeline 8 Trunks told him with a light smile. For Timeline 9 it would be Lapis, Zanya, Iolite, Joyaku and Shores. For Timeline 10, Vegeta, 18, Caulifla, Kaba and Kale. For 11, Saitine, 13, 28, Mai Bayera, Caterpesa. And for 12, Oenus Shillong, Rage Shillong, Haze Shillong, Naturon Shillong and Sanka. The 5 members that each team had chosen stood at the edge of the tournament arena. Their eyes were switching between the fighting stage before and the other opponents net to them. Point of view, Timeline C. Can we fully trust him? Vegeta questioned, looking in the direction of Super 17. Rella, Goku said to him, the real 17 is in control of his body now. Yes, but will it stay that way forever? Vegeta questioned. You know, Vegeta, some years back we could have asked the same question about you, Goku remarked. I was not being controlled by a copy of myself, Vegeta retorted. My mistakes were my own, for good or worse. Future Trunks, Lazuli and Saitine from Timeline 9 had overheard this small exchange. They knew that the super android form was the result of the original 17 fusing with an artificial created copy. But as it looked, had the copy in mind of its own and was actually hostile and had been able to manipulate the real 17. This was something worth knowing at least, even if this copy of 17 was really not longer a threat. Neutral point of view. The sound of a large gong was suddenly howling over the place. They all knew that this was the signal to start. The tournament had now truly begun. Out of them, the first ones to move were unsurprisingly Caulifla, Kale and Kaba from Timeline 10, who all transformed into Super Science and run forward, and Sanka from Timeline 12, who instantly began a transformation. It was completely different from the one the 3 Universe 2 girls normally used. For one, it was much faster. It only took around a second. She was however surrounded by a black aura during the resulting transformed Kakunsa was still looking very similar to her normal transformed state. Only that her clothes and boots were black and purple colored, instead of the green and purple of the regular Kakunsa, and she had black markings on her ears and cheeks. And she was just as fast as the normal Kakunsa. She ran in incredible speed and leaped right in front of Timeline 10's Caulifla and landed a strike at her with her sharp claws. Caulifla was barely able to raise her arm in time. As a result of that, however, Sanka's strike left 3 bleeding gashes at her arm. "Damn it," Caulifla said, holding her wound. Caulifla. Kale and Kaba both called out worried. "You," Kale growled at the dark Kakunsa, and both she and Kaba glared angrily at her. "But, please calm down, Kale," Kaba reminded her. "You know what can happen if you lose control of yourself." "Yes, I know," Kale said. As much as she wanted to attack the one who had hurt Caulifla, she was just too angry, and she knew better than anyone what could happen if she used her full power in a state like this. But in the net moment though, the dark Kakunsa had already disappeared and was now already at another part of the fighting stage. Instead, they were faced with other opponents. Standing before them were Super 17 and Pan from Timeline C. "Are you not a bit young for such a tournament?" Caulifla asked Pan. "You are never too young to start, right? Besides, I already had actual life and death fights before. So this here is nothing," Pan responded. "Very right. I like you," Caulifla told her. "But I still rather fight the big guy first." She pointed at Super 17, who just smiled. "Then come," he said. Caulifla ran at him and were trying to land a punch. But Super 17 caught her hand with his own and stopped her strike easily. Caulifla, however, just used her other hand to fire a blast straight at Super 17, that hit him square in the chest, but showed no effect. He, however, released her, and she moved at some distance to him. "How about you try again?" he asked her. "Or maybe you two ladies could try together?" He looked at Kale. "Come, Kale," Caulifla said to her, "we get this guy." "Yes, sis," she answered. They both charged up key blasts with both their hands and fired them at Super 17, who just stood there and took their attacks. Caulifla, Kale, and Kaba were joined by their teammates Vegeta and 18, and they were confronted by a few members of the team from Timeline 8, Future Trunks, Tarbal, and Gina. Standing in some distance behind them were Bamo and the small pig-like Dr. Rhoda, who seemed to be shielded by the other members of his team. "Brother," Tarbal addressed Vegeta. "Tarbal," he replied, "you have become strong. Far stronger than our father had thought you would ever be," Vegeta told him. Something about the way he said "our" seemed to sound wrong, however. "Care to put this to a test?" "Yes," Tarbal said. The two brothers charged at each other, and exchanged multiple punches. "Not bad, Tarbal," Vegeta stated. "I nearly have to take you serious." Nearly. Timeline 8's Future Trunks was meanwhile for the moment fighting with 18, and Gina with Kaba from Timeline 10. Future Trunks had now transformed into Super Saiyan 2, but to his surprise this 18 was still holding herself against him, and as it looked quite easily. "You are good," Trunks stated. "So are you, Trunks," 18 replied. "But you are not the one I want to fight here," she said a bit to his surprise. "And who is it then?" he asked. 18, he realized, was looking in the direction of Timeline 9, in fact a certain person out of them. Kakunsa, who had avoided Kaba and Kale earlier, however was quickly attacked herself by another fighter, one who specialized in speed as well, the man in a white combat suit and a helmet from Timeline 11's Universe 3 named Caterpesa. Kakunsa barely reacted in time to block a kick from him, but she stroked back right afterwards. And like before, her clawed hand ripped through the fabric of Caterpesa's suit and draw blood. While the normal Kakunsa held herself back from causing serious injuries on her prey if she could, this one was another matter. Pen from Timeline C was meanwhile firing a blast at Timeline 8's team member Bamo. That, however, was just repelled by his body. Her teammate up joined in by jumping at Bamo and punching him. But it showed no effect either. "My body is naturally immune to physical damage," Bamo told them. "You can hit me as much as you want, you have no chance." "Oh really?" Ub said. He began to power up. His strength surprised most others around him, who didn't know he was the reincarnation of Majin Buu, who had on top of that merged with the other half of himself. He hit Bamo again. But even now his strike seemed to barely hurt his opponent. But it was pushing him backwards, closer to the edge of the tournament stage. Point of view, Timeline 9. The net ones who had also gotten active by now were Iolite, Shores and Joyaku from Timeline 9. While Iolite and Shores became Super Saiyan as well, Joyaku, who was the son of Lapis and Zangya, turned into the transformed state of the Heron race. They were quickly followed by his parents Lapis and Zangya. It seems we have in fact underestimated some people here, Timeline 9's future Trunks said to Lazuli as they looked at his counterpart from Timeline 8. Both of them, just like the rest of the fighters who did not take part in Round 1, were standing right outside the fighting stage, watching. Timeline 8's Trunks Super Saiyan 1 far surpassed his own Super Saiyan 2. By what they had seen as the fighters had been powering up, the other Trunks in his base form already nearly rivaled the Demon View. Future Trunks asked himself how his counterpart had trained to achieve this. He knew from his last visit in Afterlife that his father had reached a similar level, or at least close to it. But Vegeta had been training in the Afterlife since he himself had been a baby. The other Trunks, however, should only have had as much time as he himself had, and he was not the only one. The Scions from Universe 6 were similar powerful as well, all versions of them here. No matter if from Timeline C, 10 or 8. In fact, the one called Caulifla might be a bit stronger. Were the Scions from Universe 6 just naturally that much more powerful than their Universe 7 cousins? And it were not only the Scions either. Timeline 10's18 was actually holding herself against Timeline 8's Trunks, and she did not even seem particularly strained. It seems your counterpart is a dangerous opponent, he stated to Lazuli. She is at least equal to my counterpart in his Super Saiyan 2, which is far greater than mine. If she is even showing her full power, the same can be said about your counterpart, darling, she replied. For all we know, he can go beyond Super Saiyan 2 as well. Lapis, Zangya, or Iolite will probably have to go all out against them. This was also a dangerous opponent. And of course Super 17 and some others. Bamo's near immunity to attacks alone, however, was also something to take serious. And even if threw him out of the tournament, there was another version of Bamo here, future Trunks thought. Still, if he used all his powers, none of them bothered him too much. Unless these fighters were hiding even more surprises. Fighting stage. Android 13 suddenly appeared in front of Shores and Joyaku and instantly fired a double S-bomber at the two boys. But Shores just countered it with his own Finish Buster and fired an energy ball that broke though the Bubble S, dispersed it, and so neutralized the Android S attack. Not too bad, boy, 13 remarked. The net moment Iolite moved in front of him. Not you again, she commented at seeing the white-haired android in the trucker clothes. In her timeline, 13 along with his two underlings 14 and 15 had been activated after 17 and 18 had been destroyed and brought back with the Dragon Balls as Lapis and Lazuli instead. He turned out quite persistent, and despite that they managed to beat him and thought him dead, he returned even years later. It was right then, as 13's appearance suddenly changed. His skin turned blue and his hair red. And his entire body became more bulky and muscular. I thought you can only do that when you have absorbed part from 14 and 15? Iolite asked him, surprised. Dr. Gero has integrated their part into me when he had discarded these two failures, 13 stated. I can now power up into this state whenever I want. Well, I guess that's your bad luck. Oh, I see, Iolite said calmly, and entirely unimpressed. Then she suddenly moved with a speed that 13 could not even follow, and kicked him at the side of his face with enough force to send him flying right off the fighting stage and crashing hard into the wall in front of the spectator ranks. He would have broken right though it not for the barrier that was protecting the ranks. Oh. Well, maybe that was a bit much, Iolite said. Aside from some light injuries/damage, however, 13 seemed unharmed. I hope that is now the last time we have to deal with this guy, Iolite commented. Hey, that was our opponent, Shores said to his sister. Sorry, she said, I could just not hold back when I saw him. I promise I will leave the net opponent to you. Well, that is nice to hear. They looked around and saw one of the shadow dragons standing before them. It was the very small magenta-colored one called Rage Shalom, only that he was no longer small. The creature seemed to have created itself a host body, consisting of, what it looked like, some jelly-like mass. He had now the height of a small house and his waist was nearly 3 meters wide. Okay, Joyaku, Shores said. The half-Scion now powered up into Super Saiyan 2, and the two faced him together. The Shadow Dragon and also many other people around were surprised that the young half-Scion was able to use that transformation at such a young age. And the half-Heron Jojaku also powered up even more than he had before, matching him. But Rage Shalong stayed confident easily. His power, especially in this form, was really not to be underestimated, Iolite realized as well. But she had promised the boys to leave him to them, and she was quite confident that they could take him. Point of view, Timeline 12. A minute earlier, the shadow dragons from Timeline 12 had gotten active, after they had been standing back at first. Oenus raised her hands, and the air began to move, and a wind what quickly seemed to turn into an volcano was raging over the battlefield. At the same time, lighting was coming from down right over Rage Ulong, and he was absorbing it. While outside the ring, Sinova and Ice Ulong had raised one of their hands and were sending energy to him, which, along with Oenus lightning, he was using to form his avatar body. Thank you, siblings, Rage said. A few of the other fighters and spectators had noticed this as well. Spectator ranks, giving some of your energy to other fighters is not against the rules, even if you are currently not in the ring, the High Priest announced above them. By the way, do any of you know why the Shadow Dragons had never appeared in our timeline? Timeline 0. Gohan asked the gods. I can answer this question, Master Ko said. In our world, the Namekians have an ability that allows the Dragon Balls to release the negative energy they have stored into the cosmos on a regular basis. It seems, however, in this timeline this ability had never been invented. I see, Gohan said. Goku Black, meanwhile, was just standing at the edge of the fighting stage with a thin smile on his face. It seemed recruiting this creature had been worth it after all. Not that it had been his choice from the beginning. Fighting stage. While many fighters around were somehow affected by the wind that Oenus had caused, but most of them managed to stay on their feet. They were all used to deal with far worse after all, most of them. The only reason why Dr. Rhoda was still standing on the stage was that his teammate Future Trunks was grabbing him with one of his hands. How much more time do you need for that attack of yours, Doc? Trunks asked him through the wind. Sorry, but this storm has thrown me off, he shouted back. I need to start again. The brunt of the storm, however, was directed at Ub and at Bamo, who was just pushed at the edge of the fighting stage by his stikes. Now, however, Ub himself was halted in his move by the sudden wind. While it normally would not affect him that much given his power and training, he was completely caught by surprise. Bamo, however, was caught completely helpless and pushed even further to the edge, until the wind suddenly changed direction, pushing him back onto the fighting stage. Naturon now, Oenus called out. She fired a ki blast at Bamo, that also bounced off on him, but that had only been a distraction. Naturon Shillong, a quite weak and lazy-looking weasel-like creature, had used this chance to run forward. He opened his mouth, that suddenly stretched at an impossible-seeming size. In fact, his entire body seemed to be growing as he had reached Bamo and wrapped his large mouth around him, and actually swallowed the large bear-like fighter. Then the shadow dragon's form changed, becoming even larger, and growing bright yellow spots on his gray body. He has absorbed him, Pan shouted. She remembered how the same had once happened to her. Ub charged up and fired a Kamehameha at him, but just like before with Bamo, it just bounced off on him and was thrown back into the ring. Ub and Pan both ducked, to not be hit by their own attack. The attack instead hit an very unlucky Timeline 10 Caulifla in the back, who was still concentrating on fighting Super 17. Look at me now, the transformed Bamo Naturon screamed. I am invincible. We will see about that, Ub commented. Point of view, Timeline 11. I guess this is not going too well for the start, Jero, Paparoni said to him. Your Android 13 was the first fighter to be ringed out, and quite easily as it seems. Yes, Jero admitted. But do not worry. Even in his powered state, 13 is by far not one of my strongest creations. I see, Paparoni replied. There is no reason to worry anyway. They were watching how Kaba and Caulifla from Timeline C, who were not only a couple, but had also been working together in the defense force for years, were teaming up and firing blasts at the robot Bayara. Bayara's armor is a perfect defense, Paparoni explained to Jero. Any opponent will just exhaust themselves trying to break it, and we can defeat them when they are weakened. If you say so, Jero replied. Saitin, 28, he called out, and the two androids moved to back Bayara up. Paparoni was a fool, Jero thought. He actually believed his story that his work was to better the world and for the sake of humanity. Well, it was certainly to better the world, since the humans would either be replaced or turned to better artificial beings. But Paparoni was still a skilled scientist in his own right, and from a society that had different, and in some ways higher evolved technology than Earth. Jero was all too happy for the chance to take a look at his work and take all knowledge from him that he could. Jero also did not really care about the outcome of this tournament. At least not in the way most people would think. This Dr. Jero had knowledge about parallel timelines and some versions of the future for a long time, sent to him by another version of himself from one alternate future, which had helped him to conquer his Earth, and build up his empire. He did not really care if his Earth was transported into another timeline or other planets into his, not in general. As long as it did not affect his reign over Earth or his plans to conquer more planets. But that was equally the problem. He did not know which other timelines his would be merged with. Who said that planets with incredible powerful beings would not appear right in Earth's neighborhood? So he was using this tournament as a chance to make a threat assessment of the fighters from this other timelines and to collect as much combat data about them as possible for the creation of future androids. Fighting stage neutral point of view. Caterpesa was now bleeding from a dozen wounds as the dark Kakunsa continued to attack him viciously. The white color fabric of his suit was starting to turn red. Okay, this is as far as it goes, he said. I wanted to show this only later in the tournament, but it seems I have no choice. A bright light seemed to suddenly shining from his body, and the S letter on the front of his suit changed into enlarge U. This is the ultimate mode of my suit, Caterpesa declared. It boosts not only my speed or my strength, but both of them at the same time. Oh really? Kakunsa replied. Then show me what it got. She leaped forward and her claws left another gash at the Universe 3 fighter's shoulder, and like before he managed to land a punch back at her in return. But this time the single punch was strong enough to nearly break her arm and to dislocate her shoulder. Ah! Kakunsa cried out in pain. I will kill you, she growled, but Caterpesa had just punched her in the gut. It is not so nice if you are the one getting injured, right? He commented with some snide, but then suddenly he felt himself being stopped in his tracks. He felt something wrapping around his limbs. Yet at the same time it felt as if there was nothing physical, at least psychic threads. He saw them as he tried to move. Zanya and Lapis from Timeline 9 were standing directly behind them. Sorry about this, Lapis remarked, but you know, this isn't in for all. It is nice that you have slowed down a bit, Zanya commented, and weakened each other. That allows us to do this. This threads, they were drawing away his energy, Caterpesa realized. Okay, most of his power came from his suit boosting him. Even if he was no weakling without it. But even the power of the suit itself seemed to be drawn away. He realized in shock that it was not longer working properly. Lapis was suddenly being surrounded by a red aura. An aura that several people in the stadium, especially the ones named Son Goku or Master Ko, knew all too well. He stroked Caterpesa in the stomach with the side of his hand. Not too hard, it was clear that the man was already in a terrible state, but enough to send him flying out of the ring. Zanya's psychic threads disappeared. But instead a purple aura was now forming around her, and her power increased immensely at the same time. Damn you, the injured and already beaten up Kakunsa shouted and tried to throw herself at Lapis, but Zanya intercepted her and sent a punch that Kakunsa barely managed to block with her uninjured arm. It affected her far more than it should have. She felt herself weakening even more. That punch! She realized. She was using the same technique like with her bizarre threads. She was drawing out her energy, this time with her bare hands. But before she could do anything with that realization, Zanya had already punched her again and sent her just like Caterpesa over the edge of the ring. Good work, Lapis said to her smiling. The same to you, she replied. That made 3 fighters eliminated out of 30. But Lapis and Zanya already had new problems, as Gina and Kaba from Timeline 10, who were still fighting each other, came closer to them. Gina was now in Super Saiyan 2, Kaba however still in level 1. And he was still the one overpowering her, forcing her to fall back. Damn it, the base strength of this Universe 6 Science was just unbelievable, she thought. Too bad I expected more from Yusenka, the Dark Brienne said as she and Sue watched their partner lying on the ground where she had landed, struggling to stand back up. She is injured and she was caught off guard, Sue reminded her. Spectator ranks. He was using the Kaioken, Timeline 0's Goku said about Lapis. But he is a counterpart of 17 from Trunks' world. How has he learned this? Maybe they had learned it from Master Ko at some point, Gohan speculated. Trunks from Timeline 9 said they have been his allies for a long time after all. Or maybe they met you in the afterlife. They know Master Ko and the Kaioshin after all. Maybe, Goku replied. His Kaioken looks a bit different. Probably because he is an android. I am sure 18 and me could use it as well if we tried, 17 sitting next to them stated casually. We have seen you using the technique often enough after all. Then why have you never done it? Vegeta asked them. Aside from the side effects, 17 replied, we are not sure if it would do much for us. You cannot use certain other techniques while you are using Kaioken after all. It is for example not possible for us to use Kaioken and Ultra Instinct at the same time. 18 remembered them, as you know perfectly well. Yes, right, Goku said. Spectator ranks. The guests from Timeline 0's Universe 2, however, were less interested in Lapis or Zanya. The alternate Kakunsa's cruel and gruesome behavior that filled them with shock, disgust, and horror. How could this other version of me become as bloodthirsty like this? Sanka asked. How could any version of our girls turn out like this? Helles said. Oh, I would really like to answer that question, Lady Helles. They realized that the alternate versions of Brienne and Sue were now standing right before them, right at the edge of the balcony of the spectator ranks. While the fighter's ability to fly was disabled for the matches, this was only the case while they were on the fighting stage. So right now it was no problem for the two to just fly up to them. It is not against the rules to come up here and talk to the audience when you currently aren't fighting, right, Lord Zeno, High Priest? Dark Brienne asked them. That is right, Zeno replied. It is allowed, future Zeno added. To answer your question, Brienne turned back to Helles and Pell. It was because of this one special place you would like nothing more than to hide away. The place that was created when you tried to dispel everything from our universe that you considered evil and ugly, and created a cosmic menace because you fucked up. You mean the Castle of Doom, Helles said, horrified. Yeah, the Castle of Doom, that lies on the continent of Doom, on the planet of Doom, Dark Brienne replied. As stupid as it sounds, she commented sarcastically. Our ancestors must really have been out of ideas when they came up with that names. Not that it matters. You became corrupted by it, Kaioshin Pell said. If you want to call having your eyes open being corrupted, yes, the Dark Sue spoke up, after you and Helles sent us there in the first place, because some small-time villain was trying to use the power of the castle for himself. You know, several of our comrades died. We three, Vikel and Jaimes, barely made it out alive. All because of you. You cannot blame Lady Helles for this, the normal Brienne said. Oh, look who is talking, my old self. So bright and cheerful, so full of so-called love, so pink and naive and annoying. Timeline 12's Brienne responded. Tell me, who created that place? Who sent us there because she could not clean up her own mess and was too arrogant to ask the other universes for help? Brienne did not know how to respond to this. But you are just Helles' little puppet, right? Just like I had been. I should be glad that I am not longer you, her counterpart said. By the way, the fighters from the other universes think your transformed form is fat, ugly, and ridiculous. They are just too polite to tell you this. Brienne was visibly hurt by the last comments, but tried not to show it. Her evil counterpart turned back to Universe 2's goddess of destruction. Well, Lady Helles, you better hope for your own sake that Timeline 12 doesn't win this tournament. Just to let you know, we will destroy the Helles from our timeline, and we cannot guarantee that we will stop there. With that, they flew back down, leaving a very distraught Universe 2 group behind. Fighting stage point of view, Timeline 8. Super 17 now joined his two teammates Kaba and Caulifla against Baera, who was backed up by Timeline 11's androids 19 and 28. He just raised his right hand, and fired an onslaught of first dozens, and then hundreds small key attacks at the robot. And as it seemed never-ending storm of them. For the first couple seconds, Baera kept standing. But then his armor started to break, showing clear cracks. And then the robot sank to his knees. Wow, Timeline Sikaba and Caulifla said nearly at the same time. 19 and 28 draw back. Not bad, Caulifla said. Now then. She stepped forward and gave Baera a kick that sent him right out of the fighting stage. How is that possible? Paparoni asked in shock. Baera's armor was supposed to be perfect, impenetrable. Well, it seems even your best creations are not perfect, Jero said sarcastically. He admitted it gave him a bit satisfaction to see one of the naive Universe 2 scientist's creations failing, especially against one of his own. And this Super 17, the design had certainly shown to be promising, more than promising. Super 17, however, was not the only one who joined them. Timeline 8's future Trunks and his alternate daughter Iolite, who were both looking for new opponents, appeared before them. All of them were looking at each other, judging their possible opponents. Hey, this guy belongs to us. Caulifla and Kale from Timeline 10 had followed Super 17 and now joined the group facing each other. May, future Trunks said, looking at 28. Who is that? 28 asked. That was your name before Jero turned you into an android. That does not matter, she replied. I am Android 28 and I serve Dr. Jero. The human I was created from is of no importance. She is of importance to me, future Trunks said grimly. 19. Iolite said to him, you know Dr. Jero is wrong. Why are you serving him? It is my programming, he simply responded. You resisted your programming in my reality, Iolite told him. And in other timelines as well, Future Trunks said, speaking of both his timeline S-19 and the one he had met when he traveled to the past. Dr. Gero had improved his programming methods, Saitine stated. No android can go against him, even if I wanted. I see, Trunks replied. How could you just ditch us? Caulifla asked Super 17. Sorry, but you seemed a bit distracted by the Kamehameha in your back, he responded. Well, I am back now, Caulifla explained. So let's fight again, she shouted. She threw herself at Super 17 once again, joined by Kale. The two attacked him from both sides, exchanging punches and kicks. Do I really act like this? Caulifla from Timeline C asked her Kaba. Sometimes, he replied. I heard that. Timeline 10 Caulifla called back at them, while Super 17 parried another one of her strikes. They themselves, however, were in this moment challenged by Future Trunks and Iolite. Caulifla and Kaba in Super Saiyan 1 fought Future Trunks and Iolite, both in level 2. While Future Trunks was holding himself against Kaba, Iolite, just like Gina against the other Kaba, was being overwhelmed, until Iolite transformed once again. She had turned into a Super Saiyan 3. What? Timeline C Kaba asked surprised. Another Super Saiyan form? Super 17 meanwhile was still holding himself against Timeline 10's Caulifla and Kale at the same time. God damn it. Why can I just not take this guy? Caulifla called out. She charged up a blast with both hands at Super 17, who once again just stood there and took the attack. Could you two idiots stop shooting at him? Iolite yelled at them. Don't you realize that he is absorbing your energy? You are just making him stronger and stronger. What? Caulifla called out, surprised at this revelation. Fighting stage point of view, Timeline 8. Gina knew she had no other choice now. And she powered up even more. This time, however, her hair returned to her natural black and her eyes to their natural color as well. Her power, however, had skyrocketed and now surpassed even her Super Saiyan 2 form. By far it was an ultimate form, given to her by the Elder Kaishin of Universe 7. Kaba saw this as well. This is no Super Saiyan, he pointed out the obvious. This is something completely else. Very right, Gina replied. I guess you will not explain how you achieved this state? Kaba questioned. Gina smiled. Magic, she said, from one of the Kaishin. I see, Kaba replied, a bit surprised that she actually decided to give him an answer, even if it was vague. Now then, He transformed into Super Saiyan 2. I saw you and some of the other Saions here doing this, Kaba explained. I had discovered the Super Saiyan some years ago now. So I thought I should be able to do this as well. Damn it, Gina thought. Well, there was a chance she could take him even like this in her ultimate form, maybe. And that was a big maybe. But then something happened that completely surprised her. Lapis moved beside her and fired a photon flash at Kaba. He was using Kaioken times 10. Zanya appeared net to them and joined in with a blast on her own. Why are you helping me? Gina asked. We are not at the same team. We don't, Lapis replied. We just thought he might come after us net. With other words, you think he is a more dangerous opponent than me. She sighed. Well, can you blame us? Zanya asked. Kaba now fell back. This three together seemed too much. But then, he was getting help as well. Timeline 10S18 moved net to him. You, she said in an angry cold voice, looking at Zanya, you will suffer. I will let you get away with a quick ring out. Moment, Lapis said. I don't know what problem you have with Zanya. I have heard that you are supposed to be peaceful in your timeline, more or less. But if you want to harm my wife, 18 repeated the word, as if it sounded like poison. You really are with that bitch? Look, I know about Zanya's past, but she has changed. And I am not a saint anyway, even if I was not really responsible for the destruction my other personality had caused. Your wife, 18 sneered, is the reason my brother is dead. Zanya gulped as she heard this. It was just after we had been fighting Majin Buu in 17, and Goku had both sacrificed themselves to stop him, 18 explained. As her group of space pirates appeared. They attacked Earth, terrorized the planet, destroyed entire cities and kept us from using the Dragon Balls to bring Goku and 17 back. She is the one who had killed Dend and made the Dragon Balls useless. Lapis actually looked visibly distraught after hearing this. This is terrible, I admit that. But you cannot blame Zanya for crimes another version of her had committed, he said. I cannot. Tell me, has this version of her, she pointed at Zanya, not joined Bojack's group willingly and fought and killed innocent people for him, for who knows how many years. When she finally left him enjoying you, was it out of the goodness of her heart, or just out of her because she jumped boat out of her self-interest? I thought so, 18 said as never Lapis or Zanya answered right away. Fighting stage point of view, timeline 9. 18 from timeline 10 moved and she was now standing right in front of Gina Trunks and my daughter from timeline 8. She was so fast that even Gina, who was in an extremely powerful ultimate form, given to her by the Elder Kaishin, could barely react to it. Then 18 just knocked Gina aside. She simply backhanded her, and Gina was not only thrown off her feet, but propelled and sent flying towards the edge of the fighting stage helplessly. To her luck her father Trunks moved and jumped to catch her. He was just in a fight with his Timeline 9's counterpart's daughter Iolite, who had now transformed into a Super Saiyan 3. But seeing what happened, she allowed him to disengage her and save Gina. Just how strong was this version of 18? Lapis and Zangya from Timeline 9 asked themselves after seeing this. Especially Zangya, since 18 had just announced that she was targeting her. Cabby, you take that 17 wannabe, 18 said to him, looking at Lapis. That woman is mine. Alright, he answered. The sheer rage at the alien woman he was seeing on his teammate's face actually unsettled him a bit. But she would not go too far, this was a tournament after all, and if she did, either their host or the other fighters would stop her. Do you want me to help you? Iolite called over to her. No, Zangya replied. This is my fight. Brave of you, 18 remarked. So unlike your counterpart from my world. So you admit that I am different? Zangya stated. Not different enough, 18 stated. And why? You are still breathing. Zangya used her full power once again, with the purple aura glowing around her. 18 run forward with incredible speed. Zangya fired a ki blast at her. But 18 just dodged it, and run at her once again and threw a punch at her. Zangya managed to raise an arm in time. But it felt as if 18's strike had nearly broken the bones in said arm. You remember that it is against the rules to kill someone here? Zangya commented. Oh, like I said, I will not kill you, just nearly, 18 replied. Be thankful for the rules. Oh, believe me, I am, Zangya responded. She threw a punch, but 18 stopped it with her hand, very easily as it looked. So far so good, Zangya thought. In some distance away, Iolite had been more than ready to assist Zangya. She had seen the look in this 18's eyes and it resembled her own mother's when she was absolutely on the edge and completely enraged. She had only seen her a few times like this, but this 18 seemed somehow colder, more bitter and vengeful than her mother had ever been. Except the version of her who had been under Jero's programming, of course. But since Zangya had refused her help, how about you and me, sister? She said to Gina. Why not? Gina replied. They looked around to Gina's father who was standing next to her, but Timeline 8's Trunks was already looking in another direction. To Kale from Timeline 10, who was facing Super 17 from Timeline C, and who had now turned into a green-haired Super Saiyan form that was closely resembling Broly's. Do that, he told them. I will do something else. The two sisters faced each other. Both went into a fighting stance, ultimate form against Super Saiyan 3, and after a few moments of watching each other, Gina was the first to act. With a small ki blast aimed directly at Iolite's face. It was far too weak to cause actual damage, but served well as a distraction and covering her move. As Gina jumped forward and seemingly aimed a punch directly at Iolite's face. Gina, however, stopped in the last moment, just 1 meter in front of her, and instead used her outstretched hands to fire another ki attack. Burning attack. Iolite easily recognized one of their father's signature moves, and Gina was about to shoot it right into her face. Point of view, Timeline 8. A few minutes earlier, Super 17 now stopped playing around. He used the short moment of surprise as Caulifla and Kale were distracted by the revelation that he had been absorbing their energy all along, and leaped forward and grabbed Caulifla with his hands. And he was starting to draw the energy out of her, not by absorbing any energy attacks, but directly from her body with the energy absorbers in his palm. Kale tried to move to stop him, but Super 17 simply took one of his hands from Caulifla's body for a moment, and used it to fire a large bright-colored energy globe at Kale that hit her square in the chest and pushed her backwards. Caulifla herself struggled and tried to break free, but it was in vain. And with every moment she went weaker and Super 17 stronger. She made one last attempt and charged a ki blast with one of her constrained hands. She knew that, first, the blast would hit them both, since he was holding her arms down, and she could not move them, and second, even if she managed to hit him, he would absorb it anyway. But maybe it at least caused him to lose his grip. She fired and hit the ground. Her blast only left a small hole in the ground. That showed how out of energy she already was, but he finally released her. If the small explosion had actually distracted him, or if he had just realized as well that she was finished, she did not know. Caulifla stumbled on her feet and nearly fell over. "Damn it," she said. "I admit you got me here. I am completely empty." "Sis," Kale called out and rushed in to help her. Super 17 finally released Caulifla and met Kale instead. He tried to grab her as well, but she evaded the move, barely. "Kale!" Caulifla called out. She was breathing heavily. "Let us end this now. We attack together. Either he goes down, or we do." They attacked Super 17 from both sides, both of them throwing a punch. But he managed to catch both of their fists with his hands, absorbing even more of their energy for a second. Then he pushed them backwards. Kale caught herself. Caulifla, however, collapsed, now completely out of energy. "You are really good," she said to Super 17. "I admit I have lost. Even without the whole absorption thing, I am not sure if we could have won against you." "Yuri, welcome," Super 17 simply said and pushed her out of the ring. "You have eliminated sis," Kale said. "And she put up a good fight," Super 17 replied. "But this is a tournament, and someone has to lose." Yes, a good fight, he thought. But they both had not been strong enough to be an actual challenge. Kale's hair was starting to flash, from golden to green. Another transformation, Super 17 thought. "Good. Calm down, Kale," Caulifla called to her from the outside. "He is right. It was a fair fight and I just lost. He was stealing our energy the whole time," Kale said, "and we should have realized this far earlier. This guy had just outsmarted us and was better than us. I think we would have lost anyway. Besides, we were fighting him 2-against-1 the whole time, so it was hardly unfair." "Maybe," Kale admitted, "but that is one reason more that I need to do that. Otherwise I have no chance against this guy. Besides, if I really go out of control, this guy's over there will stop me, right?" She pointed towards the spectator ranks. Kale's transformation continued. Her hair turned fully green and her slender body grew and became more and more muscular, turning into a tall, muscle-packed giant. And her eyes turned completely white. Yes, the fighters from Timeline 8 and 9, in and out of the ring, recognized. This was a female version of Broly. But far, very far stronger than the Broly they had known ever was. 17, she growled, "Fight me." The two were running at each other, and their fists clashed, either of them holding anything back. Timeline 10's Caulifla was watching the fight with fascination and some worry for Kale. "This was how my Caulifla died," she heard a voice speaking to her quietly from behind. It was the older Kappa from Timeline 8. Kale had lost control when she was using that form and was running amok right in the outer districts of Sadala City. "You tried to stop her." She turned around to him. "Kale died as well," he told her. When she realized that she had killed the person who meant most to her, she literally pushed herself into space and blew herself up to die. Caulifla cringed. She tried not to show it, but she knew she failed in that. "And why do you have to tell me all that now, you morbid bastard?" she acclaimed. "To keep the same thing from happening to you, and if I have to hurt your feelings to get it into your thick skull, then so be it," he told her. Point of view, Timeline 9. Just as Gina was about to fire, Iolite moved her own hands in front of her and concentrated her ki to stop the blast, and bent herself slightly backwards. She caught the burning attack with both her hands, and pushed the attack upwards. After a few moments she managed to redirect it, and the blast went upwards through the atmosphere and then into space. "You are good," Iolite said to Gina. "Thank you," Gina replied. "So how long can you hold this form?" she asked. Iolite fired a blast herself. The attack was nothing special or powerful, but enough to distract her opponent for a moment. While Iolite formed a royal blade in her hand and moved forward, she slashed at Gina. Not in a way that would cause serious harm, but at least light injuries at arms or legs. Gina attempted to dodge the slash, but it still left a thin cut at her arm. "As long as I need to," Iolite said to her. "I see," Gina replied. She fell back to get greater distance between herself and Iolite. She was charging up ki. And then Gina held both her hands in front of herself and formed a globe of highly concentrated energy. Iolite considered for a moment to move in to stop her or counter with an energy attack of her own, but that might be equally what Gina was counting on. If she came closer, she would probably use the change to through the attack in that moment. And getting into a direct beam struggle against an ultimate form while you were a Super Saiyan 3 might not be the wisest idea. Gina threw the energy ball at her. It missed and flew harmlessly over Eyelight's shoulder, who then attempted to run forward, to close the distance between her and Gina again. But then she sensed that the energy ball had changed direction, and was now heading for her from behind. She moved to dodge it, so Gina could control it from a distance. Eyelight saw her directing it with the assistance of small movements of her fingers. It was now constantly following her. The energy ball was incredibly powerful, Eyelight sensed. Not powerful enough to cause actually serious harm to her, but enough to cost her a lot of energy to shield herself, and maybe still cause some damage. And the explosion would probably blind and temporarily stun her, and give Gina an opening for further attacks. Well, the response was obvious. She tried to get closer to Gina again, while also evading the energy ball. The closer they were to each other, the harder it would be for Gina to hit her with this attack without getting caught herself as well. Point of view timeline C. Ub and Pan were still fighting against Naturon Ulong, who had just absorbed Bamo, and with him his abilities. He, with some assistance from Pan as Super Saiyan, were raining down punches and kicks on him. They were still not causing much real harm, but they were pushing him closer and closer to the end of the fighting stage. "You are still not harming me," Naturon said. "We don't need to," Pan replied. "We just have to push you over the edge." Naturon laughed out. "Thanks for telling me that, stupid girl," he said. "But for that you need to come pretty close to it yourself, right?" Pan gritted her teeth. Bastard. She remembered how Naturon had absorbed her in the same way in their world, until her grandfather Goku had managed to free her. "You could try to use the magic you have gotten from Bu," Pan suggested to Ub. "It has side effects when I do that. Besides, I am not sure if it would even work on a magical being like him," Ub replied. "But I have an alternative." Kaioken, the familiar red aura flared up around him. It was in a somewhat different tone as when Lapis had used the technique earlier and looked equally like Goku's version. Because in opposite to Lapis, he actually used natural ki instead of artificial one. He punched Naturon once again. This time the force of the strike literally blew him backwards. Naturon's Batomo's body stretched like a rubber band and flew out of the fighting stage. "No!" he shouted. But he could not do anything about it. He was out of bounds. At least he still had this incredible useful body that he had taken, Naturon thought as he stood up again. "Excuse me," he heard someone saying net to him. It was Goku from Timeline 0. "But since your fight is over, how about you release this guy you have absorbed?" "How, there is nothing in the rules that states I have to do that," Naturon replied. "Yes, but there is also nothing in the rules against me doing this," Goku said. He punched him in the gut, hard, and suddenly Naturon and Bamo were being split apart. Bamo was unconscious and instantly fell over. "How?" Naturon murmured. "Force Spirit Session," Goku explained, "a technoke that can separate fusions and absorption." Just as he said this, Naturon passed out as well. "Hey, not bad, me, Timeline CS son," Goku called out over to him. Point of view timeline 9. The two boys Shores and Joyaku were still fighting the now technically enlarged Rage Ulong, a large created avatar body made of a half-transparent elastical mass created from energy, with Rage's real small body at the core of the construct. So far they had been using ki attacks, which so far however only showed a limited effect on Rage's oversized fake body. "We could go to our limits and blast him again," Shores said. "But then we might lose too much energy for any other fights." "Maybe we should change our tactic a bit," Joyaku suggested. "How about threads and blades?" "Good idea," Shores replied. Joyaku stood in front of Rage Shenlong. He materialized his psychic threats, using the same technique as his mother, and formed them around the shadow dragon, and used them to draw away his energy. "Hey, what is this? What kind of technique is this?" Rage Shenlong exclaimed. He saw and felt the threads around him and felt his energy slipping away. Rage had not seen Zanya using the psychic threads against Caterpesa earlier. He and the other shadow dragon had been concentrating on their own plans, so the move now caught him completely by surprise. He could only growl at them in anger, and Shores formed a special key blade in the palm of his right hand. It was a technique his family and his timeline had invented called the Royal Blade. They had named it like that because of the energy blade was formed to intentionally resemble the old Vegeta family's symbol, with one sharp spike spreading up from one side of the blade and a rounded one from the other. While Joyaku weakened and slowed down their opponent, Shores now used this blade to slice into Rage Shenlong's fake body. He moved back and forth, leaving multiple cuts along his body. Okay, Joiku acclaimed, now we blast him again. They both charged up their attacks, Shore's a burning attack and Joiku a photon flash, and they fired at the same time. And as his already damaged false body around his small real one was breaking apart, the combined blasts were also pushing him over the edge of the fighting stage. When he was lying outside the ring between the remains of his avatar body a moment later, he heard Sin Shilong's cold voice. Beaten by 2 children, what a disgrace. We got him, Joiku, Shores called out. Yes, but they did not have much time to enjoy their victory, as they were suddenly confronted with new opponents. Or better said, Shores was suddenly shot in the back. Arg! He shouted. He and Joiku looked around. It were androids 19 and 28, who had just shot him. It hurt, but as it looked it was a light injury. She was simply not strong enough to cause actual harm to the Super Saiyan 2. The 2 androids were not longer busy assisting Bayara, for obvious reasons, since he had already been eliminated. Shores! Timeline 9's future Trunks and Lazuli also called out from the sidelines. You will regret this, bitch, Lazuli said, more to herself than to 28. You shot Shores in the back, Joiku said angrily to 28. This is not against the rules, she stated, and you two had let your guard down. I am sorry for this, Saitin told them, but according to our sensors, you two are the closest to us in power. Saitin, Shores said as he saw the counterpart of his friend. But Saitin moved to attack. Shores took a small jump backwards and dodged the strike. Saitin, however, used the chance to turn over his lower arm and reveal a cannon beneath it that was ready to fire. But Shores knew that trick. He easily evaded that shot as well. He appeared right before Saitin and placed a punch on him. Not too hard, just enough to send him over the edge of the stage and out of the fighting bounds. 21 meanwhile fired a volley of blasts at Joiku. But like Saitin with Shores, she was no match for him. He did not even bother to dodge her blasts, and just let them bounce off on him, and then punched her into the stomach, hard enough to let her fly out of the ring. 28 landed on the ground, not far away from Trunks and Mai from Timeline 10. Hey, are you alright? Trunks asked her a bit awkwardly, but with obvious concern. Yes, 21 responded at first in a flat tone, but then, why do you even care about this? It suddenly burst out of the android. I don't know you, she shouted at him. Your girlfriend is standing right next to you. And I am not her. I might have been created from her, but I am not the same person and I don't give a damn about you. Do you get that? Yes, I get it, Trunks replied grimly. My net to him was also not looking more than a bit uneasy. Was 28 right? Was there really nothing left of the other Mai in her? Well, this outbreak alone at least proved that she still possessed emotions. The 5 fighters from Timeline 11 have been eliminated, the voice of the Grand Priest tallied over the stadium. We got have beaten them 2 Shores, Joiku said. You should not get overconfident, boys. They heard a voice coming from directly behind them. It was Oenus Shlong. This is nothing personal, but it was my comrade you had just eliminated, she told them. With one move she unleashed from just not even 2 meters distance a small tornado at the 2 from their last fight's already weakened boys, that threw them completely off balance, and literally blew them into the air. Both of them fired a 2-handed ki blast against the barrier that protected the spectator ranks, to use the recoil to keep themselves from being blown out of bounds. Joiku then materialized his psych threads and tried to use them against Oenus. But before he could do that, he was already hit by another sharp wave of wind. While the psychic threads themselves didn't possess mass, and would not be affected by the wind, it made it however nearly impossible for him to concentrate on the target. Then Oenus jumped upwards, literally inside the calm center of her own storm, and sent Joiku with a kick out of the fighting stage, and then did the same thing to Shores with a ki blast she fired at him. Are you okay? Lazuli asked the 2 boys a moment later. Yes, Shores replied. We lost, Joiku said. Don't worry about that. You 2 did great, Shores' father Trunks told them. They were just completely outmatched, they heard Oenus saying. Don't worry. I did not attempt to cause any real harm to them. I would not hurt children, unless it is absolutely necessary. Interesting words from a member of a group which purpose is to destroy the entire galley, Trunks commented. Yes, that is our purpose. But that does not mean all of us have this goal, Oenus said. And we should simply believe you that? Lazuli remarked. Oenus just shrugged her shoulders. Believe what you want. If you accuse me, I have other fights to win. Point of view, Timeline 8. Vegeta landed yet another punch at Tarbal. He had now stopped holding back, and it showed more and more what was the case and Tarbal had been suspecting from the beginning. Even after all the progress he had made and the power he had gained, he still had no chance. Vegeta was now in Super Saiyan 2. A Super Saiyan 2 those power easily matched the one of Timeline 8's future Trunks. It might even surpass it by a bit. Vegeta lifted both his arms at his sides and charged up an energy blast. Final flash, he said, loud enough for Tarbal to hear the name. Super Gallic Gun, Tarbal responded. The two blasts clashed, but his was quickly being overwhelmed and pushed back towards himself. Until Tarbal could not longer keep it up and his blast broke. But Vegeta stopped his own blast in the same moment. Instead, he charged at the now exhausted-looking Tarbal. And he punched him so hard in the chest that a few of his ribs broke. Vegeta, however, had stopped all pretense of compassion and of respect. Tarbal was slammed hard to the ground by another strike. Weak and pathetic like you have always been, aren't you? Vegeta said. You are absolutely no match. It is no wonder that the Saiyan kind had sent you away and forgot you iced. Why, you are not my brother, he said. You are not even another version of him. Who are you? Oh, really? Vegeta said. You think I am not who I am seem to be? He had a grin on his face that was completely unlike any kind of Vegeta. Well, I guess there is no need to hide it anymore, he admitted. As he spoke, his voice suddenly changed. But his voice was not the only thing. Something that looked like a silvery liquid mass seemed to be suddenly flowing out of Vegeta's body, and then wrapping itself around him. After a moment, the substance had completely covered him and virtually become the skin of the figure standing before Tarbal, and his power was increasing drastically. BB, Goku from Timeline C and future Trunks from Timeline 9, standing outside the fighting ground, said as well, Who or what are you? And what have you done to my father? Trunks from Timeline 10 shouted. Vegeta BB turned around to him. Surely you remember the fleet of my minions that came to your planet 1 year ago? The M2, the machine mutants? Timeline 10's Gohan replied. But we defeated them? Yes, but you never discovered me on board of their ship. Well, none of you did except Vegeta. I took over his body without any of you noticing it, and iced it under you for the last year. Spectator ranks. What? Timeline 10's Bulma called out in shock and horror as she heard that her husband's body had been taken over by some kind of creature for the last year. The fighters were normally too far away to hear what they were saying, but their Timeline S was used his staff to help the see and hear the scene. Point of view, Timeline C. Super 17 was still locked in a hand-to-hand fight with Kale. In this form she possessed really an enormous power. At the same time, however, her rational mind seemed to vanish more and more. To his surprise, future Trunks from Timeline 8 appeared and placed himself directly beside him. Are you trying to help me? Super 17 asked, surprised. Not equally, Trunks replied. But I have met Broly and I want to keep another green-haired maniac from getting on a rampage and putting everyone here in danger, especially my family. So if she shows any sign of attacking bystanders, I help you put her down. In this moment, however, they both saw the scene of BB showing himself at the other side of the fighting stage. No, Trunks said in a hollow voice. BB, Super 17 stated. You know him? He appeared from space about a half year ago, enslaved the population, including most of the Z fighters. Was by what I heard killed by Son Goku when he tried to flee after being defeated by him. Good, Trunks replied. Can you deal with her on your own? I think I can. I guess this guy is a greater problem? Super 17 said. Yes, he is. Future Trunks transformed once again, to a level higher than Super Saiyan 2. His hair was standing up even more and a far stronger lightning surrounded him than it ever did in SSJ2, forming a bluish and golden Nyed aura, and his eyes turned white. Spectator ranks. This is the Super Saiyan Rage form of the future Trunks we know, Vegeta from Timeline 0 stated. Yes, that means he must have some knowledge of God Ki, Timeline 0's Goku said. That also explains why his base form is so strong. I asked myself where he had learned this. Whis questioned. Point of view, Timeline 8. Future Trunks was now moving over the fighting stage to face BB once more. He had used this form only a few times before. It was difficult to access and hard to control. This form required God Ki and he was still flawed in using it. The only reason he could do it at all were his lessons with Miras when they were allied with the Galactic Patrol and fighting BB and his machine mutants together. Miras, as he had explained, was an angel who had been undercover in the Galactic Patrol, and as such he could not use his powers to help them directly, or he would be erased from existence. But he could teach him. They did not have much time, so the training had been short and incomplete, but it had been enough to defeat the BB of his timeline, and hopefully at this one. Uncle, he said to Tarbal as he reached them, Please leave this to me. Fighting stage point of view, Timeline 9. Android 18 from Timeline 10 was attacking Zanya viciously. She had watched her from the start of the tournament, and knew about her ability to rob other fighters of her energy, not just with the already known psychic threads, but somehow also just by touching someone. And 18 knew from appearance with Bojack's group from her own timeline, that this technique worked even on artificial ki like hers, so she was instead raining down volleys of blasts at her from some distance, at least for now. At first Zanya evaded and outrun the first few blasts she was firing at her, that were hitting the ground around her and blowing small splinters out of the fighting stage. But given that 18 was starting to literally bombarding the entire part of the fighting area Zanya was standing on, it was impossible to avoid aloft them, and some of the blasts hit her. And in the same moment she realized that 18 had been bluffing. The blasts were feints with no real power behind them. When they hit her, she barely felt it. 18 however used the moment of distracted and charged at her in her incredible speed, and then landed a kick right into Zanya's gut. She felt how a few of her ribs broke. Zanya tried not to cry out as the pain shot through her, but she failed. 18 continued right away by sending an uppercut into her face that felt like it nearly broke her jaw, followed by another punch right into her face, and then one on her chest, hitting her already broken ribs, and then a kick into her side that sent her flying a few meters away and landing on the ground. Zanya struggled to stand up again. She realized that her shoulder must be dislocated, thanks to the last kick. Her nose seemed to be broken as well, and blood was flowing down her face. Idiot, Zanya thought to herself. Of course these blasts were feints when they only blew small bits out of the ground. If they had been actually powered, they would have caused greater damage, even on this super hard material that the fighting stage was supposedly made of. She had just let 18's threats, and her tale of what her counterpart had done get to her too much. So she had completely affected her to aim to kill, or at least really hurt her, and not paid enough attention. She had thought she had left all of this behind, Zanya thought. For a moment it felt nearly like back when she had first joined the others, and especially Lazuli had a grudge on her. This literally felt like a repeat of it. Right now she regretted that she had not accepted Iolite's help. Damn pride. The same pride however still kept her from just giving up. Finally Zanya managed to get back on her feet. 18, that is enough. Stop this, someone called from outside the ring. It was Timeline 10's Gohan. You are torturing her. I will not simply watch this. You remember what equally her other self has done to us. 18 responded. Not only had she murdered your friend Dend, the god of earth, she is also responsible for the fact that my brother and your father will never come back. I know how you feel. But this Zanya has done nothing to you. She is not responsible for what her counterpart has done. We have never even met her before. Gohan. I love you, but please don't try to hold me back here, 18 told him. I love you too. But I hate it when you are like this, Timeline 10 Gohan said with a hollow, nearly resignated tone. It sounded like he was talking as much to himself as to 18. Not only Zanya, but also a lot of the other fighters around realized just now that the Gohan and 18 from Timeline 10 were in fact a couple. Despite her terrible state and the pain, Zanya could not quite suppress her surprise. You and Gohan? She said. You and Lapis? 18 simply responded in the same tone. Zanya was not the only one who reacted surprised. Several fighters from Timeline C were at least mildly surprised. Their own 18 had been married to Krillin for decades after all, and it was hard for them to imagine her with someone else. Future Trunks with 18, or rather Lazuli, was hard enough to swallow. Well, it is another timeline, right? Timeline C, Goku stated. Timeline 9's Trunks and Lazuli were easily the most gobsmacked by this entire idea. They had been watching the fight so far, worried about Zanya. But the rules kept them from interfering. Besides, Zanya herself had said that she wanted to fight this fight by herself. Future Trunks was unsettled by the entire idea of Gohan and 18. In the net moment he felt like a hypocrite, looking at his own relationship with Lazuli. He had however gotten used to seeing her and 18 as different persons. He also remembered that this 18 had never destroyed the world, either as her human or her Gero-created personality. But it felt just so unreal. Me well 18 and Gohan. It just feels bizarre, right? Lazuli said as well, but anyway, my counterpart needs to stop. Yes, Trunks said. But we can do nothing without being disqualified ourselves. And Zanya already said that she wants to fight 18 by herself. So she would hardly thank us. No, she wouldn't, Lazuli admitted. But if this continues like this, we might have to save her from her own pride. In some distance, Lapis was still fighting Kaba from Timeline 10. He was using the times 10 Kaioken. But even so, he was clearly at the disadvantage against the Super Saiyan from Universe 6. And what was worse, Kaba had already shown that he could turn Super Saiyan 2 and was not even using it against him. You are good, Kaba admitted. So are you, Lapis replied. But I have no time for this. We both knew that you could wish the floor with me if you wanted, he thought silently. But you are holding back, because you feel unsure about this 18's actions as well. Do you still think your teammate can be trusted after what she had already done to my wife? He asked. Kaba hesitated for a moment. But then, look out, Kaba called out. Lapis could instantly tell that this was not a trick. Both by Kaba's genuinely surprised expression and by the large amount of energy he felt right behind himself, they both jumped at the side and let themselves fall to the ground. In the net moment, Lapis saw what Kaba had warned him about. A large, deep green energy orb that had been fired in their direction. And by what they sensed, it had been powerful enough to maybe not downright kill them, but to cause serious damage even to them, especially if caught by surprise. And as they looked completely around, they saw the source of it. That Saiyan named Kale, who was fighting Super 17 and had turned into a bizarre green-haired bulky Super Saiyan form, and as it seemed, had completely lost her senses. I see you are not so hard after all, aren't you? Zangya goaded 18. Shooting me only with harmless blasts? Bitch, you know if I had put actual power behind this blast, half of the fighting stage would have been blown apart, and we might have no place to fight anymore. She grinned. But if you insist. 18 raised her hands over her head. Masenko. One of Piccolo's techniques. It should not be so surprising if this 18 and Gohan were lovers, then it was obvious that they also trained together. Zangya barely managed to sidestep the attack. Every move she made hurt. But she raised her arms and fired back, with a certain move. Infinity Build. The blast hit 18 square. She had not managed to dodge. And not really made a move to and just let the attack hit her. You dare to use my own technique against me? She asked. I have been training with Lazuli for years. What do you expect? Zangya replied. You sense it down to you? You mean that you have been depleting my energy the entire time? You can even embed your technique into your key attacks. Impressive. You can use it on my artificial energy, 18 stated. And not only that, it feels like your energy, I guess the same that this psycho threads are formed from, has entered my body and is not constantly drawing away some of the power my infinite energy core is producing. You actually managed to weaken me by a good degree. I am not above to admit that, she stated, but it will not help you. You can barely stand yourself now. Really? Zangya replied. Then why don't you come and finish me off? Or if you think that I am not punished enough for things I have not even done, you can continue to beat me into a pulp some more. 18 took one step forward, then another one, and that was equally what Zangya had been waiting for. In this moment she used the same tactic 18 did a few minutes ago, and unleashed a large volley of dozens of blasts into her opponent, each embodied with a small bit of the energy of her psychic threads. 18 now actually stumbled. Point of view, timeline 8. Another one of these green globes hit Dr. Rota. Or rather, it just gazed the ground in a short distance to him, left a large rift in the ground of the fighting stage. One piece of debris that was blown out of the ground, however, hit him, and that had been enough to throw him out of the ring. Timeline 8's future Trunks, who was just about to face BB, watched his teammate get eliminated. Trunks had been somewhat curious to see his special technique that he had been talking about the entire time. That was, as he said, the reason he was called Doctor. But if this technique took this long to use and he could so easily taken out by attacks from others the entire time, then it was pretty useless in a tournament anyway. In any case, he had more important things to deal with now. Point of view, timeline 9. Iolite was continuing to evade the energy ball that Gina was directing to follow her. So far she managed to do that quite well, but then Gina began to do something else. She formed a spear out of key energy in her hands and threw it at Iolite. It missed and hit, and buried itself into the ground before her feet. Iolite also sensed that it didn't seem to have enough power to seriously harm her anyway. But it was enough to hinder her movements. Gina created another key spear and another. All just thrown at Iolite's feet, while she was trying to evade the energy ball. It was clear now that she never had any intention to hit her with them. This were not attacks but merely roadblocks that made it more difficult for Iolite to evade her real attack. Iolite had however already managed to get a few meters closer to Gina. So she did what she had been secretly planning the entire time. She jumped and made a leap right in Gina's direction. It looked like a desperate attempt of a frontal attack, on the first look. With that, however, she also meant that as long as her feet were off the ground, Iolite could not longer dodge and made herself an easy target for the energy ball. Nearly instinctively, and without thinking, Gina redirected it to go after her once more, equally like Iolite had wanted. Just a split second before the energy ball hit her, she formed a barrier around herself. It was 17's technique, or at least a variation of it, but that meant that the only one who would actually be hit by the explosion was Gina herself. Damn it, she thought. She should have noticed. Iolite had gotten far too close to her. She was barely 1 meter away. But she had concentrated too much on trying to her with the energy ball. Stupid. In the net moment, her own attack blew into Gina's face. Of course, it didn't cause much actual damage. But it was enough to stun her for a moment, and to blind all her senses. And that was enough. Iolite had landed right net to her. The barrier technique only worked efficiently for infinite energy androids or other beings with endless ki supply. It just cost too much energy. But Iolite was able to keep one up for a second, and that was in this case all she had needed. She formed a royal blade in her palm and stabbed the blinded Gina into her right shoulder, who cried out in pain. Iolite, however, was breathing heavily. The barrier cost much energy, but somehow she felt even more worn out as she should be. But the same went for Gina, as she noticed. Why, you really don't hold back, aren't you, sister? Gina said. I have once trained with Grandfather Vegeta in the afterlife, Iolite stated. This will not kill you, but it will seriously keep you from fighting effectively. Do you give up? Or do you want me to wring you out? Gina looked at her injured shoulder. She had trouble to use her right arm now. I guess I have lost, she said. But let us bring this to an end. But then Gina's suppression suddenly changed. Iolite, behind you, she called out. Iolite herself sensed it as well. But it was too late. Especially with the weakness they both were now feeling. She sensed an energy attack right behind her, and the net moment an explosion. But the explosion didn't hit them. As she looked around, she saw another android barrier that had shielded her and Gina. And as they both looked upwards, they saw the 17 of Timeline 0 floating above them. Are you two alright? He asked them. Yes, Gina said. Why? Iolite questioned. This attacks could kill someone, and that would be against the rules, 17 stated. So we are authorized to interfere here. But only to stop them. Thank you, Iolite said. As they looked around, they saw that Goku, Vegeta, Gohan, 18 and this tall musculous gray alien from Timeline 0 had stopped several more of KL's attacks before they could hit more other fighters. Iolite and Gina turned back to each other. You said you wanted to bring this to the end? Iolite asked her. Yes, good. In this moment, a small ki blast came bursting right out of the ground a couple meters beside Gina and diagonally heading towards her. What? She called out, completely surprised. It was a blast that Iolite had fired into the ground at the short moment when Gina had been blinded by the explosion of her own attack earlier, and that she had kept dormant there for the last minute. The attack didn't cause any damage. In fact, that blast that was just aimed in her general direction actually missed her. But Iolite used the distraction to punch the other half Scion once more, and then push her over the edge. It was a good fight, Gina said as she was lying outside on the ground. One of the angels just appeared net to her to heal her with magic. Yes, Iolite replied, but she herself realized that she was stumbling on her own feet. Damn it, she should not be this exhausted. Point of view, Timeline C. Super 17 had just watched KL's crazy onslaught of green ki globes that had literally burst out of her and went in all directions around her. One of them had actually been fired in his direction. But he had, like before, just absorbed it. If his opponent provided him with more power, good. However, hey, he called over to her, you know this blast could have killed some of the other fighters, right? I am your opponent. And I am right here, Kale roared. But as it looked concentrated on him once more, good, he thought. This green globes could have killed some of the weaker fighters here, inside the ring and outside. This Timeline 0 guys might have stopped most of them, but even they had missed a few, and Kale could probably do this again anytime. It was better to avoid that risk as much as possible. So he drew her concentration to himself. Kale, please come back to your senses, Caulifla once again called out from the sidelines. Kale, however, did not react to her, and raised both her hands to charge up a very powerful blast and fired it at Super 17. And once again he let it hit him and absorb it. This time his body literally expanded from the key energy and shrank down to its normal size 1 second later. His power had just jumped drastically again. Super 17 moved in incredible speed and crossed the distance between himself and Kale in the blink of an eye and punched her hard in the face, while covering his fist with a small barrier. Then he punched her again and sent her even closer to the edge of the ring. Then he formed another barrier, but this time right around Kale. And then he just have the barrier a push that sent it, with Kale inside, flying out of the ring. Outside she was still in her berserk form, and showed no sign of calming down. But Goku from Timeline 0 restrained her quite easily, after he turned into a blue-haired Super Saiyan, whose ki could not be sensed. Was this what they called God Ki? And with what looked like a light chop on her neck, he knocked her out, and she returned to her normal form. Kale! Caulifla called out and ran to her, taking her from Goku. You have not really hurt her, have you? Caulifla asked him. I did my best not to. I just knocked her out. Just a few meters from them was standing Goku Black, who seemed to completely ignore everybody around him and send Shillong and the remaining Shadow Dragons net to him. The Kaishin of Timeline 12, who Goku Black had somehow compelled to bring them here instead of the fighters they would have normally chosen for this tournament, was not longer with them, and sitting in the spectator seats with the other groups instead. Point of view, Timeline 8 and 10. Future Trunks from Timeline 8 was facing BB, who had possessed the Vegeta from Timeline 10. Trunks had just turned into his Super Saiyan Wraith form. Weakling? He said. That are great words from a being who only came anywhere by stealing the energy and the bodies from others. Tarbal had reached the power he has by training by himself. What can you for yourself say? That you have stolen my father's body? These are the abilities I was created with, BB replied. I don't remember a single Saiyan claiming that it is unfair that they can turn into Super Saiyans or giant apes, while other fighters cannot. And I absorb energy and take over host bodies. Like your hair turned golden and you eyes green, he claimed. You are right, however, BB admitted. I should apologize to Tarbal. His power now is actually remarkable, given the little he had in the beginning, he said sardonically. You don't seem to have the power to match neither, BB, Future Trunks said. So maybe you should not talk so much about strength. While this was true, he was not sure for how long he would be able to hold this form. He needed to end this quickly. He began to charge up an attack. Really? BB replied, and suddenly everything changed. In some distance away, Timeline 10S18 was still facing Zanya from Timeline 9 in a brutal fight, but now 18's eyes glowed up in a light red. And she turned away from Zanya as if she was not longer interested in her at all. The same happened outside of the ring, where the fighters not taking part in round 1 were standing. Gohan, Piccolo, Goten, Trunks, even Dabura, their eyes turned red as well. The only exceptions were, what the hell is happening? Caulifla acclaimed, with Kale now in base form standing next to her, and it happened to Cabba who was fighting Lapis. As his eyes changed colors, his face first looked blank and then suddenly grinning and malicious, much like BB's own impression in the same moment, and he transformed back into Super Saiyan 2. Hey you bastard, what have you done to Cabba and the others? Caulifla shouted at BB. They are infected by BB's eggs and are now controlled by him. Timeline C. Goku called out. Be careful. They can infect you through open injuries. Okay, thank you, Caulifla said through gritted teeth. As you see, they are mine, BB stated. I got lucky and managed to get even this Cabba just before we arrived here. And now I just activated all the eggs that lay dormant inside them. Future Trunks grimaced in anger and worry. He sensed not only had BB infected almost all the other members of Timeline 10's group, they all were transferring energy to him. He was getting stronger with every moment. Now give me more of your power, BB called out. They all were raising their arms, all except 18. BB could not absorb her energy. Trunks unleashed a finish buster on him. But it might already be too late, and like he feared, the attack hit BB, but it did not cause any visible damage. At the same time, 2 metallic-looking appendages were growing out of BB's back and he was growing even taller and more musculous. He had just evolved into a new form. One that looked very similar to the one the BB of his timeline had taken in the end and that he had only barely managed to defeat. His power might have grown so far that he even was a match for his own Super Saiyan Wraith form. Spectator ranks. The 2 Zenos from Timeline 0 and their counterparts from the different timelines were meanwhile watching the events with great interest. BB is really a mean person, President Zeno from Timeline 0 said. I hope Trunks can beat him. Yes, but he is quite strong, future Zeno replied. The fight will be interesting. Yeah, a few of the other Zenus cheered. This Trunks Super Saiyan Wraith is not as strong as the one of the future Trunks we knew, Goku stated. He, Vegeta and the other were back, sitting at the Zenus and the High Priestess side. Our future Trunks had been fighting a God Ki user like Black for nearly a year, all that before we even fully instructed him on God Ki, Vegeta pointed out. This one obviously only had a short training. Let us hope that his grip on it is good enough. Point of view, Timeline C. Pan was now fighting against Oenus Shillong. Both of them had fought the other before in their own timelines. That time in both timelines, however, Pan had not been alone. She had, however, also not been alone. Fighting Oenus' control over the air, however, was just as hard as Pan remembered. It was not simply normal wind. The air molecules were moving by her command, in ways designed to keep you off balance. At the same time, she felt the air thinning around her, making her weaker. Not that the air was alright anyway, with what the shadow dragons were trying to pull here. That is a nice power-up you have here, Pan, Oenus said. Do you really think it is enough to beat me? I don't need to beat you, Pan replied, suddenly smiling. I just need to keep you occupied. Oenus realized it instantly. Pan's two teammates, the two SDF members Kaba and Caulifla, had just moved, were now running towards Hayes Shillong, who had been mostly shielded by her and her other teammates so far. But now that they were the only two of their group left in this round, and Pan was keeping her occupied, Hayes was vulnerable. Oenus turned around. Behind her she could see the two Super Saions now standing right in front of Hayes, at the edge of the stage. She raised her hand. Oh no, you won, Pan said. She had been running around her, just outside of the small tornado Oenus had formed around herself, and was now standing right between them, blocking her way. The attack Oenus unleashed in this moment was not simply wind, it was practically a rift in the atmosphere. Pan concentrated her energy to stop Oenus' attack, and she managed to do it. Kaba and Caulifla had the few moments they needed to deal with Hayes Shillong. But she felt quite weakened. After all, the poison in the air had affected her too, just like everyone else 50 meters around them. That is not fair, Hayes Shillong called out as the two Universe 6 Super Saions were standing before him. Caulifla simply fired a ki blast at him that pushed the small toad-like shadow dragon out of the ring. What is fair about poisoning the fighters during a tournament? She shouted after him. During the last few minutes, Hayes had created a not visible, odorless poison gas and spread it over at least half of the fighting stage, slowly weakening several of the other fighters. The Z fighters from Timeline 6, however, already knew his tricks and informed their teammates about it. And with Pan's help, Caulifla and Kaba had now put an end to it. As he landed on the floor outside the ring, Hayes felt, like his comrades Rage and Naturon did before, the cold eyes of Sin Shillong and Goku Black on him. Well, at least unless the other two you were not completely useless, Black commented. We got him, Kaba said. That's right, Caulifla replied. But in this moment 18 had appeared behind them unnoticed and fired a blast right into Kaba's back that sent him over the edge as well. You! Caulifla turned around to 18, who was just being joined by the Kaba from Timeline 10. She noticed a strange red in both of their eyes. What the hell? She said. Like some others, she had been too occupied to pay attention to what BB had been doing at the other side of the fighting stage. His Majesty BB has sent us to eliminate all needless other fighters, Kaba stated, especially disgusting scions like you. What the heck? You are a scion yourself, Caulifla replied. Not anymore, the possessed Kaba said. This body might be, but my mind is now pure Tsufuru. Caulifla, Pan and even Oenus raised their arms to fight them. Maybe we should work together against this opponents, Pan suggested to Oenus, just for this time. Okay, Oenus said in a flat tone after a short moment. She sounded and was all but happy. But she was not sure if she could take either of these two alone, and even less both of them together. None of them realized that 18 was still weakened by the energy depleting attacks Sangya had used on her, and those leftovers were still in her body, hindering the working of her eternal energy. But so were Caulifla and Pan by the poison. In this moment, however, someone else appeared behind 18. It was Lapis. Can I join the fight? He asked. Fighting stage point of view, Timeline 9. It was Lapis, the version of Android 17 from Timeline 9. Can I join the fight? He asked them. 18 raised an arm and fired a couple blasts at him, which were however easily stopped by his android barrier. At the same moment, though, she was herself being attacked by Timeline C Caulifla, who used the chance to charge forward and kick her in the gut. This was quickly followed by Pan attacking her equally mind-controlled partner Kaba. First with a blast fired directly at his face, which caused him to block it with his, but the blast also distracted him and left him unable to see for a short moment. And Pan following with a kick at the stronger SSJ-2. Pan was also weakened, both by Hei's Shillong's poison and by her earlier fights. But so was Kaba. She was also being assisted by Oenus, who fired a volley of blasts at Kaba herself and also added 2 small tornadoes that formed at the same time around 18 and him in an attempt to bring both their opponents off balance. And Lapis used the chance to fire a number of blasts of his own at 18. One struck her at the shoulder. Another one in the stomach, which was actually pushing her backwards, if only a little bit. And a third one. He knew that this was a version of his sister. One that had, by what he had seen, at least under normal circumstances, not been turned into a killing machine. But after what she had just done to his wife, he could not care much. He attacked 18 directly, along with Caulifla, and the two were raining down a series of punches and kicks at the female android, who barely managed to put up a fight against the two. At least not compared to the immense power she had shown earlier. It seemed Zanya had already done a pretty good job of weakening her. They might all have already been weakened. 18, however, seemed to be affected the worst thanks to Zanya. While Lapis was the least one, the poison barely affected him. Neither did it much to 18. But what the poison had not, Zanya and her technique had done to her instead. Lapis had not taken any significant damage so far, and with his eternal energy no fight would ever exhaust him. And this showed now. Not bad android, Caulifla from Timeline C commented as they both landed another hit at 18, who was completely cornered now and standing dangerously close to the edge. Even if you beat me, you will never stop His Majesty BB, she called out. Point of view, Timeline C. The mind-controlled Kaba moved to assist 18. But once again Pan and Oenus were standing in his way. Kaba! BB called out. Leave it! Come back, I need you for something else. With that, Kaba followed his master's orders, turned around and left 18 to fight for herself. Hey! Pan exclaimed and fired a blast after him as he moved away. He fled, she said. Maybe we should concentrate on the other one, Oenus mentioned, gesturing a few meters away, where Lapis and Caulifla, who were still double-teaming 18, had her just at the edge of the stage. Or maybe. Oenus Shillong looked at Pan. Well, this is still a tournament, and we are opponents, right? She stated. The meaning of her words was obvious. Now that one of the dangerous opponents they had teamed up against had retreated and the other was close to being eliminated, they would be going against each other again. Well, at least the Shadow Dragon gave her a warning instead of simply shooting her in the back, she admitted. I guess you are right, Pan responded. She raised her hand, trying to fire an attack on her, but Oenus already created another whirlwind with herself in the center, that knocked off Pan's aim before she could even fire, and then lunged forward and landed a punch in her face that threw her off her feet. Pan realized to her shock that she fell out of Super Saiyan and back into normal state. Hei's poison is still affecting you, child, Oenus said. You should better give up. Pan gritted her teeth. She knew she was right. Giving up? Forget it, she said. You will have to ring me out. If you say so, Oenus responded. She moved forward and placed another hit that sent Pan flying out of bounds. Are you okay, Pan? Timeline C. Goku asked her after she landed outside. Don't worry, Grandpa. She did not hit me that hard, she said. A second later, Kibito, that meant one of the Kibitos present, appeared and used his power on Pan to free her from the poison and heal her injuries. They did not even know if it was the one from their timeline or another one. Lapis and Caulifla now fired each a one-handed blast at 18 that finally pushed her out of the fighting stage. Just at the same time she fell out of the ring, however, 18 fired another very powerful blast at Lapis. And this time he did not raise his barrier in time, and it hit him right into the stomach. Lapis bent over in pain. His sister had not held back at all, it seemed. The attack had been on a deadly level and had left a serious injury. In fact, the blast could have killed a fighter only somewhat weaker than him. It seemed the mind-controlled 18 did not care much about being disqualified. Damn BB, he thought. Lapis had turned back into his normal state. He had been using Kaioken times 10 the entire time. And still. Just how strong was this version of 18? He asked himself. And this after Zanya had depleted her power. 18 meanwhile had landed on her back outside, but stood up again a few moments later and walked to the other Timeline 10 members. nearly all of them possessed by BB. But Lapis and Caulifla had a completely different problem right now. They had seen how Oenus Ulong had just challenged and then eliminated Pan. But since they had still been busy with 18, they had not been able to do something about it, and now Oenus had turned to them. Lapis also noticed that Caulifla Net to him had just turned from Super Saiyan 2 into base form and looked like she could fall over any moment. That meant he was pretty much by himself. By what he had seen of the Shadow Dragon, she was a dangerous opponent. Quite powerful, and her control over the air and her unusual techniques made her an even much more dangerous opponent. But he had faced other dangerous opponents before, and he was pretty sure he was stronger than the Shadow Dragon when he was at his best, only that he was far from his best right now. First was the injury. It hurt to even move. And the constant use of Kaioken had an effect even on an android. He was not sure if he could use it another time in his state. In short, he was not sure if he could win this. Oenus just smiled at them. She raised an arm and shot Caulifla with a blast that hit her and pushed her out of the fighting stage. I guess asking this Science to give up is pointless. Isn't it? She commented. Point of view, Timeline 8. The fight between future Trunks from Timeline 8 and the Parasid BB from Timeline 10, in Vegeta's body, had meanwhile turned more intense. Both opponents had for the last half-minute mostly thrown punches, kicks and lower-level blasts at each other. Right in this moment, BB Vegeta formed two key blades in his hands. It was obvious that he wanted to injure him, so that he could enter and take over his body as well. In response, Trunks formed the energy blade on his own. Not equally like the signature royal blade that his Timeline 9 counterpart and his family had invented, but a more simple improvised one. But one that did its job. Trunks parried another strike from Vegeta BB, and tried to land a few on his own, aiming for his father's arms, side and shoulders, hoping to just injure his opponent so far that he was unable to continue to fight. But like he himself did, BB had managed to parry nearly all of his strikes. All what he had to show for was a small slice he had managed to place on Vegeta BB's arm. That was enough, Trunks decided. In his rage form was still somewhat physically stronger than his opponent. The problem, however, was that this form was unstable, and he could not hold it for long. But with the power BB had absorbed from all the other Timeline 10 members and his last transformation, the gap had shrunk down immensely. Trunks had hoped to overpower his opponent physically without having to use his more powerful key attacks. At least that is what he had tried for a few seconds. But it was clear that this hope had been in vain. BB had just become too strong, and he knew that his father would have expected him to take BB down, no matter that, so he was charging up a Finish Buster at nearly his full power. He just held back so much that the blast would, most likely, not kill BB and Vegeta. Aside from the fact that he really did not want it to seriously harm his father, this was still a tournament after all. And he also did not want to risk being disqualified. Of course, he also knew that his father, any version of him, would rather die than being controlled by this creature. But Trunks also hoped that this gods and the fighters from Timeline 0 could help them remove BB and his mind-controlling eggs from their hosts after this fight was over. After he won this fight, BB Vegeta responded by charging up a blast on his own, a final flash. They both fired nearly at the same time, and the blasts clashed right between them. Tarble, who had been lying very close to the edge of the fighting stage after the beatdown from the BB-possessed Vegeta, had now managed to stand up again after some struggling. He was now watching Trunks fighting. This was now the second time he was seeing his nephew fighting this monster. And both times he was unable to do anything. Of course, the last time BB had not possessed Vegeta, but someone else. But then he realized he was not longer alone. You have been really fighting well, Scion, for someone who had, according to Master BB, had been outed for showing so little potential in his youth, he heard a voice. But I fear it is over for you now. It was Kaba, another of BB's puppets. The mind-controlled Scion had returned when his master called him back and was now standing right next to him. I will take you out quickly, Kaba said. He charged up a blast in his hand. I see, Tarble responded grimly. If that is so, why don't I take you with me? He called out. With that, Tarble fired downwards and blew up the ground they were standing on. The blast he used had only low power, but it was more than enough for its purpose. Both of them lost their footing as the floor beneath them was blown apart, and dust filled the air around them. Tarble transformed back right into Super Saiyan 2 and fired another blast, in the opposite direction to his opponent, and used the momentum to propel himself right into the possessed Kaba. Without solid ground to stand on and unable to fly, this was enough to send both of them over the edge and out of the ring. BB watched with some annoyance how Tarble eliminated another one of his servants from the tournament along with himself. But he was still in the beam struggle with Trunks. So there was nothing he could do about it. Not bad, Tarble, Vegeta from Timeline C said at the sidelines. Above them in the spectator ranks, Vegeta from Timeline 0 thought the same thing as his Timeline C counterpart. Truly not bad, Future Trunks from Timeline 9 said as well. But his and his wife Lazuli's worries were more on Lapis, who had just been injured by Lazuli's counterpart of all people and was now fighting a shadow dragon, and on their daughter, who was currently facing a very powerful opponent. Point of view Timeline 9, a minute earlier, Zanya, seriously injured and looking like she could barely hold herself at her feet, was however still in the ring. Do you need help? Iolite asked, appearing beside her. In some distance they just saw Timeline 10's getting eliminated. But they had also seen the injury Lapis had received during it. Zanya knew the alternate 18 was not equally to blame for what she did under BB's control. But with what she had already done to her before when she was not being controlled and now shooting her husband, she was furious. And would not really mind it if something terrible happened to the android. Just fight your own fights, Zanya said to Iolite. If I get ringed out now, then so be it. But I don't want to hinder your chances too. Okay, Iolite replied. There were not many fighters left anyway. Iolite was looking around to see who was still there. Aside from Zanya and herself, there were her father's counterpart from Timeline 8 and Vegeta, or rather BB from Timeline 10, who were currently fighting each other, her uncle Lapis, Super 17 and Up from Timeline C and the female Shadow Dragon. The first round was nearly over. So much was clear. The last 4 would be declared the winner, and there were only 8 fighters left. And 2 of them were injured, who just happened to be her aunt and uncle Zanya and Lapis. But they were not longer alone. Up from Timeline C was walking towards them. Okay, Iolite thought. This was it. By what she had seen of him, she had no chance against this guy. By what they had heard some of the other fighters saying, he was Timeline C Goku's student and a reincarnation of the demon Buu. But he was several times more powerful than Buu had ever been. And on top of that, Goku seemed to have thought him the Kaioken, going by his short outbreak of power earlier. With other words, there was no way in hell she could win. Despite that Iolite was approaching him, she could as well at least try to draw him away from Zanya. At least his teammate Super 17 was still standing in some distance, and seemed to be watching the fight between Timeline 8's Trunks and BB. Not that it made much difference, because she had no chance against either of them. Iolite, right? Ub asked her. Yes, she replied. Are you ready to end this? He asked. Yes, she said. Iolite transformed again into her Super Saiyan 3 form. She formed 2 royal blades in her hands and sleezed at him with both at the same time. Ub, however, stopped the 2 key blades with just his forearms. Iolite pushed herself away from him. Then she fired a large volley of ki at Ub. He blocked some of them, but the most missed him and buried themselves into the ground beside him. Ub ran forward, towards her, and just before he reached her, Iolite activated Infinite Geyser and the blasts that had just missed him broke out of the ground and targeted him from behind. But Ub just reached backwards with one hand and formed a large circle of ki that blocked all the blasts at the same time, while he used his other hand to punch Iolite in the gut. She doubled over in pain, and she dropped out of her Super Saiyan 3 form into normal Super Saiyan. Damn it, she thought. Like she had feared, she was outmatched and her techniques so far achieved nothing. To that came that she felt exhausted and tired. Ub grabbed both her arms, pressed them against her body and just lifted her up. Then he moved nearly instantly to the end of the fighting stage and simply, nearly gently, dropped her over the edge. You are a very good fighter, Ub said to her as she was lying outside, but as you know, this is a tournament. Yes, equally, she replied to him. I will not hold it against you that I lost. Her parents Trunks and Lazuli moved net to her. Iolite, you did great, her father said to her. How are you feeling? Her mother Lazuli asked. Tired and somehow, I don't know. Don't worry. Can you use the healing magic that you have learned from Kibito on yourself? Future Trunks asked her. I used it a few times earlier, she stated. But I still got exhausted quicker than I should have. You have been poisoned, Trunks told her. Poisoned? It looks like this Shadow Dragon Haze Shillong had used some kind of poison mist on half the fighting stage, Lazuli stated sternly. These angels had neutralized it out here, but since it was not against the rules, they had let him use it inside. Your healing had probably neutralized the poison as well, but since it was still in the air around you, you just got affected all over again and ended up using a lot of energy on your healing magic. I see, Iolite replied. Well, with some luck I might be immune now when it is purged from my system, maybe. But since both you and Haze Shalong are already out, I don't think it will be much a difference now, Lazuli commented. Point of view timeline 8. The beam struggle between future Trunks and BB was still going on, but after a short time Trunks was getting the upper hand and his blast pushed BBS back towards him. Do you really want to kill your father? BB called out. Even if it is just an alternate version of him, my father would be the first to tell me to take you out at all costs, Trunks responded. Besides that, I know he would be rather dead than being controlled by you. The point where their blasts were clashing moved another meter closer towards BB. Is that so? He said. Then, if not your father, maybe someone else? BB looked sideways. To the point where the assembled group of Timeline 10 fighters were standing, Trunks followed his gaze, and what he saw made his blood freeze. Timeline 10S18, who had been ringed out a short time earlier, was standing there, right in front of her Timeline S Gohan, less than a meter away from him, and she had her hand stretched out, and a key blast already formed in her hand, aimed directly at Gohan's heart. Gohan, just as much under BBS control like 18, was meanwhile just standing there, completely powered down and defenseless, while his lover was about to kill him. Was this the reason BB had ordered Kaba not to help 18 earlier? Trunks thought. The rest of BBS mind-controlled servants were standing in a circle around them, keeping anyone else from interfering. He saw that Goku and Vegeta from Timeline C, his own and 18's counterparts from Timeline 9, and the only two members of Timeline 10 that BB did not control, Caulifla and Kale, were all looking at the situation as well and looked ready to interfere. But before them were standing Timeline 10's Piccolo, Goten, Trunks, Dabura, and Kaba blocking their way. So you are hiding behind hostages? Trunks commented. Why shouldn't I be surprised? This is the purpose of my servants, to live and to die for me, BB stated. Now, how about you stop your attack? Otherwise the counterpart of your mentor will die and through the hand of the woman he loves. You don't even need to die. Just give up and step out of the ring. Or just let me eliminate you. We could bring Gohan back with the Dragon Balls, after we have dealt with you, Trunks retorted. Maybe, BB responded. But even if you manage to do that, he will still have it eat. And he and everyone will remember that it happened. Is losing to me really such a great price to avoid this? In this moment BB managed to press Trunks' blast back again by a few centimeters. No, Trunks thought then. Should BB actually manage to win this tournament, there was no telling what he might wish for. He knew of course that there were other fighters here who could manage to stop BB, but he could not bother to take that risk. Not to mention that some of the others did not seem to be any better than him. If there was only a chance of someone like BB or the Shadow Dragons winning, it could lead to a disaster for entire universes. BB needed to be stopped. He knew this, but still. The thought of seeing Gohan dead again, seeing him die right in front of his eyes. Trunks felt his hands shaking while he was trying to hold up the blast. You seem distracted, BB said. What do you say? We could at least stop shooting at each other until you have made up your mind. To back up his words, he lowered the power of his blast a little bit. Then he suddenly jumped aside, out of the way of Trunks' blast, which hit the barrier separating them from the spectator ranks, and BB stopped his own final flash in the same moment. Trunks stopped his own blast as well. Not because he agreed to BB's offer, but because he would risk hitting others if he redirected it in the direction that BB had jumped to. But he and BB took aim at each other right again. In the moment you fire again, Gohan will die, BB said. Spectator ranks, Lord Zeno S. Loge. That bastard, Goku from Timeline 0 said as he saw the alternate version of his son being taken hostage by BB. He and the other Timeline 0 members could move down there in the blink of an eye and interfere if needed, like they had shown before. But even they would hardly be able to get there, get through the other Timeline 10 fighters and stop 18's blast, all in the split moment she would need to fire. If I could raise a barrier between them, I could block her shot, 17 said. But even I cannot form a barrier that precisely over such a long distance. They are standing only centimeters apart. Technically this is not against the rules, the High Priest stated. Lord Zeno had never made a rule that forbids to take your own teammates hostage, only because nobody, not even Lord Zeno, had ever thought that anybody would ever actually do such crazy bullshit like this, 18 pointed out. That is true, Zeno himself pointed out. Still, it is not against the rules. But if anybody stops them, we will not say anything, right? He looked at future Zeno net to him. Right, future Zeno agreed. I could use instant transmission to appear rigged net to them, Goku said. But like 17, I am not sure if I would appear close enough. Centimeters were never an issue before with the instant transmission, not to mention that the surprise of you suddenly appearing net to her might cause 18 to shoot in the first place. Their own Gohan pointed out. Ultra Instinct could be a way to move that fast. But the drawback here was the same that gave the technique its advantage in the first place. The body moved practically on autopilot without the conscious mind, and so without any real plan. I am still waiting for a better chance, Goku replied. Maybe she will get distracted for a moment, or something. So do I, 17 said. But with some luck the guys down there will do something before we do. They are far closer and in a better position. Point of view timeline 9. Lapis was hit by wave after wave of razor-sharp wind caused by Oenus Shalom. He tried to shoot her, but the wind constantly threw off his aim. At the same time Oenus also formed a blast in her hand, to which Lapis responded by raising a barrier sphere around himself, and charging a blast of his own. Of course neither of them could actually shoot each other as long as the barrier was up. And for Oenus trying to break it would not only be practically impossible given her power level, but also wasting her energy. So they were both just watching the other to make a move. And finally Oenus made one, by creating an even stronger storm around them, the strongest she had so far, but contained to the part of the fighting stage they were standing on and not reaching the other fighters around them. One that actually started to move the barrier sphere itself from its place. Lapis reacted by deactivating the barrier and at the same moment firing the blast he had prepared. Unsurprisingly it missed, given the wind. But it prompted Oenus in coming a bit closer, just like Lapis had wanted to, and firing her own, which also did not hit. Ironically, the storm she herself had summoned was a great part of the reason she had not been able to hit him. Lapis now did what he had planned all along and formed another barrier sphere, a much larger one. Not just around himself, but around both of them. The sphere was around 12 meters in diameter, and it stopped and reflected Oenus' wind, so that she now could not longer use it without being affected herself. Oenus was nearly being blown off her feet by a wave of her own wind. Lapis used the chance to move forward and hit her right in the face. Oenus was thrown back by his punch and slammed against his barrier he had just formed around them, and in that moment something happened. Oenus' form seemed to shift and change. Instead of the teal-skinned young woman, Lapis saw for a short moment the figure of another monstrous-looking humanoid dragon before him. Then it shifted again and Oenus was back looking like before. What? Lapis said, surprised. Oenus looked at him with a deep frown, looking both angry and embarrassed. She was looking around at the other fighters and the audience. As it seemed nobody was paying much attention to them. Most were concentrating on the fight between BB and Trunks and the hostage situation. But since they were in a stadium filled with hundreds of people, it was very unlikely that truly nobody had noticed anything. Do I see that right, that you are a shapeshifter? Lapis asked. Oenus looked like she was gritting her teeth. In some sense, yes. What you just saw was my natural form, she admitted. But I am able to make myself look like this. But not forever. And it is still not my real body, but long enough to make everyone here think that it is, it seems, Lapis commented. It is still not my real form, Oenus hissed angrily. What you see here is not much more than an illusion. My real body is the grotesque thing you have just seen. But, if I could get that wish, do I understand this right, that you only want to win this tournament to turn this into your real form? Lapis stated. But your comrades want something like universal chaos? Yes, she replied. He was trying to wrap his head around the idea that this shadow dragon seemed to be a girl with issues about her looks. Lapis knew of course that he could not really trust anything the shadow dragon was saying. And even if she was speaking the truth now, her teammates might force her to get along with them anyway. You realize that your chances are practically zero, right? Lapis stated. You are very powerful, yes. But there are many people here who are just above you by far. And don't get me wrong, but I cannot even see you beat me. Especially not if I were actually in good shape. And I am not even the strongest here. Oenus' frown deepened even more. But she said nothing. She knew he was right. Besides, even if you were somehow the last one standing, how do you think your comrades would react if you simply fulfilled your own wish instead of theirs? He said. They wouldn't be happy, I imagine. So what? She replied. Are you saying I should better help my brothers and my other teammates wish for chaos and destruction for a few galays or even a universe or two? Don't misunderstand me. Under different circumstances I would gladly help them. I am a shadow dragon and I feel the same need as them to destroy the galley where I was born from. So much for the idea that she is harmless, Lapis thought. But still, you know, my team has actually no idea what we should wish for if we win, he stated. We are quite happy, and if we need something we can use the normal Dragon Ball which the Namekian Den has made. So how about an offer? He continued to say a few more words. At the same time, however, in a short distance away, the scene had just played out in which BB had forced the mind-controlled 18 to take and also controlled Gohan hostage. Lapis took a look over to them. It was against the rules of the tournament to attack people outside the ring, or the other way around. There was nothing he could do. As long as he was in the tournament. To hell with it, he thought. As long as people like BB did not win, it did not really matter who did. He looked around. The 17 and 18 from Timeline 0 were up in Zeno's loge and Super 17 was on the other side of the fighting stage. He was the closest of his counterparts. He looked over to Super 17 and gave him a nod. Then he looked to his wife Sanya, who was standing quite close to the circle of mind-controlled Timeline 10 warriors, only that standing inside the ring and they out. Then he turned back to Oenus Ulong, who had been watching him, ready to continue the fight at any moment. Okay, think about what I just told you, he said to her. Goodbye then. He turned around and walked a few meters towards the end of the fighting stage. Hey, what are you doing? Oenus asked, confused. Then Lapis took the small step over the end. He was out. Fighting stage point of view, Timeline 9. Sanya knew there was not much more she could do for this round of the tournament. Like everyone, she would only get healed when the first round was over. But there was something else she could do. The mind-controlled Timeline 10 warriors were not paying even attention to her. Their focus was entirely on the other fighters who were not taking part in the tournament's first round and who were standing in a large circle around them. BB and with him his puppets were obviously not expecting someone from inside the fighting stage to get involved. Given that it was against the rules and you would get instantly disqualified if you attacked someone outside the ring, this was not entirely unjustified. But still, BB obviously did not even realize that most people here would take saving Gohan's life, even if it was an alternate version of the one they knew, as more important than winning this tournament. And that some could simply disqualify themselves. An obvious logic failure, of course. Who would pay much attention to an injured and for all purposes already beaten fighter like her anyway? Sanya, though with some sarcasm, she had just watched Lapis willingly step out of the ring, after he had given a nod to her from the distance. Point of view, Timeline 8 and 10, Gohan was just standing there. His power level completely down, making no move to defend himself by BBS while helpless. Future Trunks knew he should not hesitate and do what he had to do. But he had still let himself get distracted. Just enough to give BB a small advantage. He had let himself believe that he had to deal with this on his own. But he didn't. He was not on his own here. Now BB asked him, what shall it be? Your elimination or Gohan's life? Neither of it, Future Trunks replied confidently. In this moment an android barrier appeared in the few centimeters right between Gohan and 18's outstretched arm, blocking the prepared blast she was holding in her hand. What? BB called out. And in the same moment Super 17 from Timeline C moved and was now standing between Future Trunks and BB. You are interrupting my fight, Trunks said to him. Sorry, but you seemed a bit distracted, Super 17 replied. And with this guy I don't want to take any risks anymore. And Zanya suddenly jumped over the edge of the fighting stage, and fired a two-handed blast at the possessed 18, that hit her right into the face. Of course, given that Zanya herself was injured and weakened, it didn't cause much actual damage, but it was enough to throw her off her legs and keep her from threatening anyone else for the moment. The net moment 17 from Timeline 0 appeared net to them. He was giving the possessed 18 what looked like a light slap to her head, and instantly the mind-controlling egg that BB had planted in her was removed from it, and was flying beside her in the air. 17 just destroyed it with a blast from his finger. Good job, he said towards Lapis and Zanya. You could have done this yourself, Lapis commented. You were closer, 17 replied simply. At the same time Timeline 0's Goku, Vegeta, Gohan and 18 were moving and freeing the other Timeline 10 members from their parasitic eggs in the same way, using spirit fission and destroyed them right afterwards. Now that Gohan was not longer a split second away from being killed, this had no longer any risk. You made a mistake, BB, Future Trunks told him. Your mind-controlled victims only concentrated on the fighters outside of the ring. You ignored the ones inside. What are they doing? They shouldn't have interfered. The rules, they can only if they had stayed in the fighting area, Trunks reminded him. You were thinking too much in line with the game. Had you never considered that anyone could just give up their place in the tournament? He questioned, and with that the chance of a wish from this mysterious Super Dragon Ball, he thought. A wish without any limit. Trunks could only imagine too well what BB would have probably wished for. In this moment Super 17 stepped out of Future Trunks' way, and Trunks instantly fired another finish buster, which hit the still distracted BB frontally and pushed him backwards. But he concentrated his own energy, and at least put up resistance to Trunks' attack, slowing the movement, but still being pushed back. But Super 17 joined in with a one-handed blast on his own, hitting BB from a different angle. Against both their attacks, BB was now overwhelmed completely. He lost his footing on the ground and was thrown out of bounds by the two blasts. BB was eliminated. All but 4 fighters have been eliminated. The first round is over, the Grand Priest's voice hallooed over the place. The remaining participants are Super 17 and Up from Timeline C, Trunks from Timeline 8, and Oenus Ulong from Timeline 12. It was over, at least as far as it came to the tournament itself. Point of view, Timeline 10 and 0. For the members of Timeline 10, however, there was a far more important matter. Nearly in the same moment he was out, Vegeta from Timeline 0 appeared right next to BB. He gave him what looked like only a light slap, but he was using spirit fission to get BB out of his counterpart's body. BB, who for a moment was now just a humanoid-shaped silvery mass that only took distinct features again a short time later, was flying out of Timeline 10's Vegeta. A Vegeta who looked shocked, confused, and somehow broken for a second. But then his oppression became focused again as he saw the creature who had taken over his body and tormented him and his family for so long. 1 year for 1 year he had been possessed by it. He had to watch helplessly as BB did the same to Bulma, Trunks, Bra, and the others. But now, he growled angrily. He raised his arm and fired a blast at BB. The attack disintegrated the left arm and shoulder of the parasite. But BB's body regenerated itself within seconds. Vegeta, however, already followed with a stronger attack. Gallic Gun. No, damn it! BB called out as he saw this. He tried to get away, getting as much distance between himself and the Scion as he could, possess someone else. But it was too late. Is this allowed? Goku from Timeline C asked as he and the others were watching the fight. There is no rule against killing someone outside of the tournament, Timeline C, Vegeta stated. And if my 2 counterparts don't finish him off, I will do it myself. Timeline 10's Vegeta fired his Gallic Gun, which hit and completely engulfed BB's body. Vegeta from Timeline 0 joined in with a blast of his own, similar to how Super 17 and Future Trunks had done it a few seconds earlier. The 2 attacks wiped out every cell in BB's body this time. He was gone. Now it was truly over. Are you alright? Timeline 0's Vegeta asked his Timeline 10 counterpart. I am not sure, he replied. Vegeta knew himself well enough to know that the insecure answer alone meant that he was obviously not. We can help you, he offered. We can also teach you the technique we used to free you. That means if any of the other people you know in your timeline had been infected by BB. Thank you, Vegeta from Timeline 10 said. A few meters from them the rest of Timeline 10's team was in a similar state like him. One who looked particularly distraught was Timeline 10's 18. Who just realized that she had nearly killed the man she loved when she was under BB's control, and she realized who were the 2 people who had stopped her. She looked at Lapis and then at Zanya, and she was overcome with another feeling, guilt, especially when she saw the state Zanya was in, because of her. In this moment she fully realized for the first time that Zanya had actually never done anything to her. She would have liked nothing more than to blame this also on BB right now. But the truth was the egg in her head had been dormant until BB had activated it and taken control of her. Her actions until then had been entirely her own. I am sorry, she said. One of the angels appeared next to them and used healing magic on them both. After a few seconds Zanya's injuries had disappeared, followed by 18's. You know I understand why you did it. I understand perfectly well, Zanya stated. Hell, there was a time I would have probably thought that I deserved what you did to me for all the things I had done as I was with Bojack. But that is not accuse isn't it? 18 replied. No, it is certainly not, Lapis said sharply. But like my wife said, we understand where you came from. But Zanya commented, there is one thing I wanted to give you. With this she punched 18 in the face. I guess this is what I'd serve, 18 said, holding her cheek. Does this mean we are good now? She asked. We are, Zanya replied, unless you want me to hit you another time. I think I will pass, 18 responded. Timeline 10's Gohan was walking towards them. Thank you, all of you, for helping us, he addressed Lapis, Zanya, and the Timeline 0 fighters around them. No need to thank us, Timeline 0's Gohan said. Now that the first round is over, and other issues have been resolved, the High Priest announced, we take a short break of an half hour, before the second round begins. Taking a break, that was an understatement if the fighters who took part in this tournament had ever heard one. Several participants had suffered serious injuries and had just been healed, Zanya only being the worst of them. A good deal had been poisoned by Haze Shalong, and the entire Timeline 10 team just had been freed from mind control. Taking a break was really putting it lightly. Point of view, Timeline 10. There was also another question regarding Timeline 10. After what happened, all of their team members looked worn out and somewhat broken. They had just been freed from what it seemed a year of mind control after all. Will you guys even take part in the rest of the tournament after what had happened to you? Goku from Timeline 0 asked them the question. They're 18, Vegeta, or rather BB with Vegeta technically never having taken part, and their versions of Kaba, Caulifla and Kale had already been eliminated, which left Gohan, Piccolo, Trunks, Goten and Dabura. Gohan gave a short look to 18. I will continue, he said then. So will I, Dabura stated. I think I will not, Goten said. After what happened I just don't feel like fighting anymore. You don't have to explain yourself, Goten. It is your decision, Gohan told him. I think I will quit too, Timeline 10's Trunks stated. None of their teammates were actually surprised by their decision. Trunks and Goten might have never been nearly as dedicated to fighting as their fathers. But after what they had just gone through, none of them could blame them. But I will take part, Piccolo told them. If he was honest, he had considered dropping out too. But he would stay at least to support Gohan. He knew Gohan saw this as a chance to bring back Dend and the Dragon Balls and maybe his father Goku and 17. Okay, that means 2 more people are out, Timeline 0's 17 stated. That meant Timeline 10 had 3 fighters left. Point of view Timeline 11. Meanwhile, Dr. Gero and Paparoni were drawing their own conclusions from the first round. For Gero, his primary purpose of collecting combat data and information about the other timelines had so far certainly been fulfilled. The power that some of the other participants had shown was shocking to say the least. The data he had collected was more than promising for future projects. Alone the revelation that the technique called Kaioken could be used by androids. He had not thought this was possible and never considered the idea. If he was honest though, Gero had realized that he should probably give up any hope of actually winning this tournament. Even his strongest androids would be completely outmatched. And he seriously doubted that the remaining fighters of his Universe 3 partner would do much better. Their only real chance would probably be to hack and take over one or more of the stronger androids from the other timelines. Which meant either the Super Android 17 from Timeline C, the Cytine from Timeline 8, or the androids from Timeline 9, but which one of them was the most promising target? That was the first question. Point of view, Timeline 12. The 4 Shadow Dragons who had taken part in the first round were standing before Sin Shalong and Goku Black, who both looked all but happy. Standing next to them were the 3 corrupted Universe 2 fighters from their timeline. But they did not take part in the conversation. Despite being temporarily allies, they did not really consider the issues of the Shadow Dragons their business. Well, it seems you at least are not entirely useless, my dear, Sin said to Oenus Shalom. In fact, I am actually a bit surprised that you came this far. Well, it was a bit luck in it, wasn't it? Oenus frowned. He did not need to tell her that many of the other fighters were stronger than her. She had already noticed that herself. She still fought well, Nova Shalong stated. Yes, she did, Sin replied. Then he turned around to Rage, Naturon and Haze. You 3, however, he said. Sin Shalong raised his hands and blasted Naturon's and Rage's heads off. Completely off guard and weakened from their earlier fights, they had no chance at all. And then he did the same to Haze, who had still time to look at him in absolute shock as he realized what happened and call out desperately. Sin, please don't. But he too was one moment later engulfed by another blast and disintegrated. The fighters from the other timelines had turned around to them in alarm. For a split second they had thought they were being suddenly attacked. They saw, however, that this was not the case. Many were shocked that Ulong had just killed 3 members of his own team, and about the massive increase in power he had just gained. Many others, however, were less shaken by it, and had just watched the scene with silent contempt. Under them were the different versions of Son Goku, Vegeta and Gohan. They had seen the same from Frieza, Babidi, Bojack, even Vegeta himself in the past and others. Why should they be surprised? Of course they still didn't like it. All what was left were the 3 corrupted Dragon Balls that had created the 3 shadow dragons that were floating in the air before them, and that Ulong quickly pulled towards himself with a move of his hand and absorbed them into his own body. In the same moment he got an incredible boost of power. Even the other shadow dragons were shocked. You just killed them, Ulong said. Yes, Sin replied simply. The 3 Dragon Balls from the other shadow dragons were now placed on his chest, net to his own. Are you planning to do the same to us? Nova asked him. Only if you lose, Sin said. We still need you for the tournament, after all. Do you truly expect us to believe you that you won T and us too as soon it is convenient? Ice answered. Either that or I can end you right now. It is your choice, Ulong stated. Nova, Ice and Oenus looked at each other. They knew they had no chance against him now. Not after he had just absorbed the power of their brothers, but they also held no illusions. If Ulong intended to unify the power of all the corrupted Dragon Balls into one, then it was only a question of time until they needed to die as well for that goal. But it was too late to stop him. Even if they teamed up, they were no match for him now. You don't need to look so desperate, Goku Black said to them. His voice sounded smooth and more than a bit arrogant. I have an offer for you. What if I gave you the ability to ice without your Dragon Balls? Then you would not longer have to worry about Ulong taking them from you, right? He stated. If you prove yourself worthy of such a gift, of course, he added. And why have you not mentioned this before our 3 brothers were killed? Nova Ulong asked him. Now why would I have bothered with this 3 weaklings? Black replied. He smiled. He and Ulong had planned out this entire scene perfectly. Right net to them the 3 dark versions of the Universe 2 maidens had witnessed the entire change as well. Their doubts about their teammates had increased as well. Not that they had trusted them much from the beginning. They were just here because this Goku Black character had offered them a chance of a wish from the Super Dragon Balls. Point of view, Timeline 9 and 8. That was good work, Future Trunks from Timeline 9 said to his counterpart. Good work, yes, Timeline 8's Trunks repeated. I could not stop him by myself. But I realized I didn't need to. Very right, Lazuli said to him. I have to agree, Goku from Timeline C said. You did great. Thank you for your help, Timeline 8 Trunks said to Lapis and Zangya. Don't you worry about it, Lapis said. You sacrifice your place in the tournament to save Gohan, and to get 1 over BB, Lapis responded drily. To be honest, I did not care that much about winning this tournament in the first place, as long as the one who does is someone halfway decent. It is not as if I need a wish from the Super Dragon Balls. I am quite happy as it is. We are, Zanya added, and besides Trunks, Lazuli, Saitine and the others are still in. So we might still take this, right? They and the other teams left the fighting area and were now for the moment roaming the place around the stadium itself. Zeno and the High Priest had allowed that, as long as they were back in time. To say the sight was interesting would be an understatement. This was the planet of the Grand KO after all. Goku from Timeline C introduced the 2 future Trunks and their teammates to Paikahen and some of the other afterlife warriors. Well, technically it was the first time they met, since this Goku was from another timeline. But he did not care much about this. So you fought Goku in another tournament when he first arrived here? Future Trunks from Timeline 9 asked. Yes, in both our timelines as it looks like, Paikahen replied. We were pretty even back then. But now I have absolutely no chance against him. The rate you scions grow stronger is just too high. Goku only smiled at this. I fear I am not quite as strong as the me from this world, he said, and I have met you Dabura, Paikahen stated as he looked at the former Demon King standing in the group of Timeline 10. We have fought before too. But in our case it was not a tournament. I assure you, I am not longer the same man you have met, Dabura replied. Everyone around knew this could be interpreted in more than one way. Excuse me, someone said from the side. It was Android 18. More precisely the 18 from Timeline C in her super form. But right then she deactivated the systems of the android copy she was merged with inside her super android body. And her appearance turned back into that of the regular 18. While she was technically still fused with it. Just her hair was a bit shorter than Lazuli's own. Lazuli, right? She addressed her Timeline 9 counterpart. You prefer to be called that? Yes? She replied. I have a suggestion for you, Timeline CS18 said. The rest of the half hour passed quickly. The second round of the tournament was about to begin. Are you ready? Goku from Timeline C asked his World-S versions of Goten and Trunks. A short time later the remaining 40 fighters were standing assembled on the fighting stage. Another gong announced the beginning of round 2. Thanks for watching this video. You really enjoy this video. Like, subscribe, and comment down below, and turn on that bell notification. Don't forget to support and follow Shadowwriter01 for writing that awesome fanfic, and also make sure to comment on this story link in the description. See you in the next video. Goodbye.